courtroom was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. Maria sat in the witness stand, a single photograph clutched in her trembling hands. A picture of her daughter, Elena, taken the day before she was taken from her. Her voice was steady at first as she described the small, windowless room where she'd signed the papers. How the agency workers spoke quickly, avoiding her eyes. How she was told her love wasn't enough, that Elena deserved more. But when she spoke of Elena's tiny fingers curling around hers one last time, her voice faltered. The room seemed to lean closer. "I didn't give her up because I didn't want her," Maria said, her chin lifting with quiet defiance. "I gave her up because I was lied to." Across the aisle, the Richardsons' attorney shuffled papers, expression unreadable. But in the jury box, a middle-aged woman's eyes filled with tears. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a truth that reached past the walls of the courtroom, into the hearts of everyone listening. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound in the dim maternity ward, soft but constant, like the low murmur of a world Maria no longer felt part of. She sat hunched on the narrow hospital bed, her knees drawn close, cradling the tiny bundle that had been placed in her arms only hours before. Newborn Elena was impossibly small, her weight almost unreal, her warmth startling in its fragility. Maria could feel the rhythmic rise and fall of the baby's chest against her own, the faint scent of milk mingling with the sterile sharpness of antiseptic. Someone had wrapped Elena in a pale yellow blanket, too big for her tiny body, so that her face peeked out like a delicate blossom half hidden by folds of fabric. Maria's fingers trembled as she traced the curve of her daughter's cheek. She wanted to memorize everything: the feathery lashes, the faint swirl of dark hair damp against her scalp, the way her tiny mouth opened in a silent yawn. The world outside this hospital might have been cold and unkind, but here, in this small circle of warmth between them, there was something close to peace. And then the voice came. "You're doing the right thing, Maria." The woman standing at the foot of the bed had introduced herself as a counselor from the adoption agency. She had kind eyes, but they seemed to look past Maria rather than at her. She carried a clipboard smooth in a river. The woman placed the clipboard gently on the metal side table and slid the papers toward her. "I'll walk you through it. Just a few signatures, and we can make sure she's cared for right away. You'll be giving her a future." Maria looked down at the stack of forms. The words blurred on the page, long sentences about consent, relinquishment, legal guardianship, phrases she barely understood. She wanted to ask for more time. She wanted someone to explain it slowly, to help her figure out if there was another way. But she could already hear her stepfather's voice in her head from a week ago, sharp and final. "You can't bring a baby into this house. You're on your own." Her throat tightened. "Maria?" The counselor's voice was still soft, but there was a hint of urgency now. "The couple is waiting." The couple. She hadn't seen them. They were names on a file, vague descriptions about stability and opportunity. And yet in a few minutes, they would carry Elena away and she would, what? Go back to school? Try to find a job? Pretend none of this had happened? Maria bent her head, pressing her lips against Elena's temple. She tried to hum the lullaby her mother used to sing when Maria was little, just a few lines about the moon rising over the fields, but her voice cracked halfway through. She rested her cheek against her daughter's head, willing herself to remember the shape of this moment, the faint tick of the wall clock, the weight in her arms, the desperate wish that someone would come through the door and say she didn't have to do this. The pen felt heavy in her hand when she finally took it. She didn't look up. Her signature came out crooked, the letters uneven and unsure. "There," the counselor said gently, sliding the papers back toward her own clipboard. "You've made a beautiful, selfless choice." Maria's arms refused to let go at first. It was only when the nurse stepped in and murmured something about time to check her vitals that she allowed Elena to be lifted away. The blanket shifted, revealing the baby's tiny fingers curled into a fist, and for an instant, Maria had the wild impulse to grab her back, to run, but her legs felt like stone. The door closed softly, and the room felt colder without the would never let her feel alone. And now she is gone. The window glass was colder than it should have been for a spring afternoon. Maria pressed her fingertips to it anyway, as if the chill might wake her from whatever this was, this quiet where the world was moving and she was not. The maternity ward looked down over a narrow strip of parking lot lined with ornamental pear trees just starting to bloom. White petals moved in a wind she couldn't hear, drifting like small pieces of paper torn from a page. Far below, a nurse with a navy cardigan pushed a wheelchair toward the curb. In the wheelchair sat a woman whose posture was perfect, hands folded in her lap as if awaiting a photograph. Beside her stood a man in a crisp shirt the color of rain. He checked his watch, then tipped his face to the sky like he had somewhere important to be after this. The nurse was speaking. Maria could not hear the words, but she could read the shape of kindness in the nurse's mouth, the way people soften their tone around beginnings and endings. The sliding doors hushed open. A separate figure stepped through with a small bundle, pale yellow blanket, the same one. For a moment Maria's breath stalled and her palms flattened against the glass. She didn't know this man, the one who carried her daughter as if he had practiced the motion. Maybe he was a charge nurse or a volunteer. Maybe he was just someone who had been told, "Here, take the baby to the front." It shouldn't matter who he was, but it did. In 100 small ways it did. Inside the room, the counselor from the agency stood at a forgiving distance, as if giving Maria privacy were a kind of mercy. Her voice, when it came, was low and even. "They'll send photos and letters," she said. "We've arranged it. You did a brave thing today." Brave. The word had a bright, polished surface that didn't let anything in. Maria nodded without turning from the glass, watching as the man in the rain-colored shirt took the bundle and settled it into the woman's arms. The woman looked down. Maria did too, but from stories higher, through the reflection of her own face in the window. A veil of sky and glass betrayed all the ways this was not the same as looking into her daughter's eyes. The counselor's shoes made a soft sound on the tile. She pictured tucking those photos into a shoebox and opening it in the quiet after midnight, holding the paper like it might still be warm. It felt like a story someone tells to a child so they can sleep. It might be true. It might be a way to live. Down below, the woman in the wheelchair lifted a corner of the blanket and adjusted it with deft, practiced fingers. She was beautiful in a precise way, like a photograph that has been retouched until every edge is clean. The man touched her shoulder. They were smiling. Maria tried to imagine their kitchen, white cabinets, the hum of a refrigerator, the habitual clink of a spoon against a teacup, a high chair by the window, a calendar with tidy squares. She had a sudden wish to believe in that kitchen with all her strength, as if her belief could make it kinder. A gust of wind blew a confetti of petals across the curb. The nurse shaded her eyes and said something to the man. He took the carry seat from the back of a car the color of a wet stone. He opened the door with care, as if the hinges themselves might bruise. When he reached for the bundle, the woman hesitated. She looked reluctant to let go. Maria surprised herself by seeing that and feeling a strange, twisted gratitude. It was small, but it was human. The counselor's reflection hovered beside Maria's in the glass. "If you'd like," the woman said, "you can write a letter we'll place in her file, something for her to read when she's older." Maria's voice surprised her when it came. "Will she know my name?" "Yes," the counselor said too quickly, then softened. "If that's what you want, you can choose." Maria rolled the hospital bracelet between her fingers in her pocket. The plastic was thin and warm from her skin. The bracelet had Elena's name and Maria's, bound by a number. She imagined a day years from now when a girl with dark eyes would ask simple questions in a kitchen. Where do I come from? What did my mother sound like when she laughed? Did I like warm milk or the soft hum of a fan? She wanted there to be answers that were more than paperwork. She wanted there to be a story with tenderness inside it. Below, the man clicked the carry seat into place. The sound was crisp even this far up. He checked the memory on so it didn't slip. She fixed each in her mind like pins in fabric. Behind her, the television mounted high on the wall murmured a daytime show where cheerful hosts talked about grilling season and backyard herbs. The sound felt like a room she would never enter again. "They'll send photos and letters," the counselor said a third time, as if repetition could build a bridge across a chasm. "We'll make sure of it." Maria nodded because it was easier than explaining that love had never felt like this, like standing at a window while something essential moved away in a car you could not follow. Love, in the stories she'd been given, had music swelling beneath it, petals blown only for beauty's sake, a soft focus miracle where everyone did the right thing and felt lighter for it. But here there was only the neat efficiency of adults who were sure, the hush of automatic doors, the click of a car seat locking into place. She saw the nurse lift her hand in a small wave toward the baby, then toward the woman. The man rounded the hood, slid behind the wheel, and for a moment, before the engine turned, everything went still. The trees, the nurse, the sunlight, like the world was holding its breath. Then the car eased forward, unremarkable, the pedals skittering away from the tires in a low white wake. Maria felt it before she knew how to name it. Not a break, but a widening distance inside her, two shores pulling apart with a river running colder between them. She leaned her forehead against the glass and closed her eyes. The surface smelled faintly of cleaner. In the darkness there she could still see the car, the bundled yellow, the small movements of people who believed they were doing right. She stayed with those shapes until they faded, until all that remained was her own breathing and the dull ache under her ribs where her body remembered a weight it no longer held. The counselor touched Maria's elbow in a practiced, careful way. "Do you need anything? Tea? Water?" Maria shook her head. Her voice would not obey her yet. "If you give me an address," the counselor said, "I can make sure the first packet gets to you. They're very committed to openness. It's a gift, really, what you've done. For her, for yourself." A gift. The word rang hollow, like a bell with a crack you couldn't see until the sound failed. Maria drew her hand from glass. The bed showed the shallow impression of where she had sat in the last hour, the curled edge of the blanket, the oversized hospital socks dangling at the end like a child's abandoned mittens. On the tray stood a lidded cup with a straw bent at an angle. She took a sip. The water tasted faintly of plastic. She imagined the elevator, its soft bell, the shush of the doors, the underground garage where the air smelled of oil and damp concrete. She imagined the couple turning right at the exit, then left at the traffic light, a route already chosen by a navigation voice that sounded kind, but held no room for detours. Maybe they would stop for coffee on the way home. Maybe they would speak in low, excited voices about linens and lullabies and the miracle of chance. Maria sat on the edge of the bed and smoothed the blanket with the flat of her hand. Quietly, because no one had asked, and because she needed to make something sturdy out of this hour, she began to frame the opening lines of the letter she would write. "My name is Maria. When you were born, the petals outside the hospital were white, and the sky was the color of a clean sheet. You fit into my arms like you had always known the way. I want you to have more than I could hold then, but I kept your name in my pocket so I could carry you somehow." There would be more words. She understood now that words could be anchors when nothing else could be. She would write in the evenings wherever she landed next, at a kitchen table in a place that smelled like other people's lives, or on a bunk in a shelter where the hum of sleep rose and fell like a tide. She would describe the small, true things of this day, and none of the platitudes. She would tell the truth about love, how sometimes it didn't look like triumph, how sometimes it looked like letting go and then learning to remain, somehow intact, in the space that letting go made. "Shall I call someone for you?" the counselor asked. A friend at the shelter? Yes, Maria said, hearing how steadier her voice had become, as if a beam had been slid into place beneath the words. Please. When the counselor stepped into the hall with her phone, Maria stood and opened the shade again. The parking lot was only a rectangle now, the car already long gone, the pedals moving on their own, unbothered by who had arrived or left. She pressed the bracelet once, quick and sounds, and stepped into the next part of the day. The shelter lobby smelled faintly of laundry soap and pencil shavings, a small domestic mercy after the antiseptic brightness of the hospital. Maria stood a moment just inside the door, letting the steady hum of the vending machine and the distant rhythm of a washing machine settle around her like a blanket someone had left on a chair. Afternoon sun slid through the narrow windows in pale rectangles, warming the scuffed linoleum in patches that looked like islands on a gray sea. Two girls sprawled on the sagging couch beneath the bulletin board. One had glitter on her nails, the other wore a sweatshirt 3 sizes too big, sleeves pulled over her hands. They were arguing gently about a song on someone's phone. Too many drums, not enough. Their voices rose and fell with the absent-minded ease of people who trusted time to give them more of itself. A third girl balanced a geometry book on her knees, mouthing formulas, pencil tapping a soft metronome on the cover. They glanced up when the door clicked, the way people do when a draft slips across their ankles, and then return to their small, ordinary worlds. Hey, kiddo. Ms. Alvarez leaned on the reception counter, elbows planted, chin tipped the way a person holds their face when they want to look calm for someone else. She wore her key ring clipped to her belt, a slow constellation that chimed when she moved. You good to sign in? The pen was attached to the clipboard with blue painter's tape. Maria wrote her name carefully, block letters, nothing flowing today, and handed the pen back. A smile tried to cross Ms. Alvarez's mouth and didn't make it all the way. She set the clipboard aside as if it were something that could bruise, and then came around the counter. I made tea, she said quietly. It's that cheap peppermint the donations always bring, but it's hot, and it counts. She tilted her head toward the tiny kitchen. The mug was chipped on the lip, a small half-moon missing from the ceramic. Maria turned it until the smooth part found her mouth. The peppermint was too sweet, but the steam warmed the thin place below her sternum where cold had pooled. Ms. Alvarez did not ask questions. Her presence was an arm around a shoulder without the weight of a hand. When Maria thanked her, her voice sounded like a radio station had written "Keep climbing" along the snow line in bubble letters. The tables were old but clean. A boy with a cowlick worked a crossword as if the answers might keep the day from tilting. A younger girl drew flowers in the margins of a worksheet, concentric circles in pink and blue. Maria chose the table by the window where the light was gentlest. She set the mug down, then sat with both hands in the front pocket of her hoodie, the fabric worn smooth inside from a dozen washings. Her fingers found the bracelet immediately, as if it had been waiting for them, and traced the printed name the way a person might walk the same path every evening to make sure the ground still held. Elena. The letters were cool at first, then warmed under the slow rub of her thumb. She did not take the bracelet out. It felt right that it should live in that pocket for now, something she could touch without explaining. A tiny, quiet ledger where love could be tallied without anyone seeing the numbers. Outside, the maple by the fence held on to last fall's seed pods, 2 winged shapes that rocked in the light breeze but would not let go. In the yard, a stray grocery bag caught on the lilac bush and fluttered in a sound like paper sails. Someone in the hallway laughed, a bright ribbon of sound that unraveled and then wound itself back up. Your turn, said one of the girls from the couch, poking her friend with a socked toe. Top 3 throwback songs. Go. The other girl groaned with theatrical despair. You can't spring a life or death choice like that without prep. They debated albums and choruses and summer nights like cartographers arguing over where to draw a coastline. Maria let the talk drift through the study room like a harmless current. It made the air feel breathable. And yet, beneath the noise, There was a hush inside her that even peppermint tea could not reach. It was not emptiness. It was a full quiet, heavy with something unnamed, as if the room had agreed to hold its breath beside her. She opened the notebook Ms. Alvarez kept in the supply cabinet for anyone who needed paper, speckled black and white cover, the kind school lists recommend in August. On the first page she wrote the date in the top right corner, and then in the careful handwriting her third-grade teacher had once praised with a gold star, "My name is Maria." The words steadied her hand. She waited for the next sentence. Name, Ace, was printed in bold. In the corner someone had drawn a small heart in ballpoint pen and shaded it in. She didn't know why that picture paused her the way it did. Maybe it was the steadiness in the dog's gaze, something like attention without demand, as if the animal had made a practice of seeing things others missed. Maybe it was the promise inside the words community and safety, a place where adults explained instead of hurried, where no pen was placed in your hand until you knew what story your signature would write. The geometry girl sighed and snapped her book closed, sliding the pencil beneath the elastic band with the precise care of a person saving daylight. "I'm taking a break," she announced to no one in particular. "My brain is full of triangles." "Triangles are just shy hearts," said a voice from the couch. "Poet," someone teased. Maria smiled without meaning to. It was a small movement, a dimple more than a decision, but the making of it eased something between her shoulder blades. She lowered her eyes to the notebook again. The second sentence arrived without fanfare. "You were born on a day when the petals looked like little pieces of sky trying to be snow." She didn't cross it out. She allowed herself that small bit of prettiness. There was room for it, even now. Footsteps paused by the door. Ms. Alvarez gestured with a tin of crackers, salted squares in a clear sleeve, and lifted her eyebrows. Maria nodded. The crackers were the kind that crumbled softly at the edges and left salt on your fingertips, a taste that went well with peppermint in a way that surprised you. She ate 3, slow. The crumbs dotted her notebook margin like a constellation. "You need anything else, mija?" Ms. Alvarez asked, voice low, so the question could land without requiring a leap. "I'm okay," Maria said, and for the first time that day, the words felt true enough not to echo. A shadow moved across the page as a cloud passed the sun. When the light returned, it found the bracelet again through the fabric and warmed the small circle of plastic against her skin. The feeling reminded her of how Elena had warmed her arms earlier, weight and breath and a hum that might have been the beginning of a song. She pressed her palm flat over the pocket, as if to keep that warmth in place. From the hallway, someone called for a charger. Someone else asked about borrowing, until the peppermint cooled and the ink smudged slightly where her hand brushed the bottom of the page. When she looked up, the dog on the flyer was still watching with that attentive, almost amused patience. In the pocket of her hoodie, the bracelet shifted as she adjusted her posture. She took it out finally, the plastic band a pale crescent on her palm. The printed letters were no longer stark. They had softened the way permanent things often do. She traced ELENA, the way a person might trace a name carved on a park bench, not to claim ownership, but to recognize presence. Then she slid the bracelet back inside, deeper, tucking it beneath the stitched seam so it wouldn't catch on anything. It felt less like hiding and more like planting. Evening sidled in, the kind that doesn't announce itself, only deepens the color of the furniture and calls the lamps to life. Someone in the kitchen clattered pans, metal meeting metal in a fugue of small household sounds. Ms. Alvarez turned on the table lamps, and their soft shades made pools of gold on the pages. The geometry girl reopened her book with a sigh that had surrendered in it, and then, somehow, hope. Maria closed her notebook gently. The letter would wait. Letters were patient. She slid the book into her backpack and held the mug in both hands, letting the last of the warmth travel into her fingers. When she stood, her chair made a quiet scritch against the floor, a sound that felt like a sentence ending in a period rather than an exclamation mark. At the door, she paused to look again at the library flyer. The date was circled in green marker, Tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. She imagined the dog's bright eyes, the way its ears would swivel toward the smallest change in air. She didn't know yet that attention could be a key. She only knew the picture made something in her sit up straighter. Back in the lobby, the girls on the couch were laughing at an old music video that made everything look softer than it was. Maria slid into the remaining cushion, not to join the conversation, but to let the sound of it rest against her. She tucked her hands under her thighs, felt the bracelet press into the fabric, and held still. Silence, she realized, did not always mean absence. Sometimes it was the place the next true thing gathered itself, like breath before a name. Outside, unstarted. News was often a room too loud for her to enter. But today the front page caught her like a sleeve snagging on a nail. A photograph stretched across the fold, a white-trimmed house with a porch that wrapped around it like an arm. A swing hung at one end, cushions in a blue that matched the shutters. In the foreground, a woman and a man stood shoulder to shoulder, angled towards the camera the way people do when they've practiced. The headline was gentle, almost devotional. Model adoptive parents celebrate 1 year of giving back. Someone had tucked the paper onto the coffee table in the common room, between a stack of coloring books and a chipped bowl of oranges. The television above it was set to subtitles and a morning show, but no one watched. Girls drifted through on their way to school or work, laces trailing, backpacks soft with use. Maria sat on the edge of the sagging love seat and slid the paper closer. A corner had already bent, leaving a triangle that pointed neatly toward the couple's smiles. They were the kind of smiles made for frames, the man's confident, teeth even as a picket fence, the woman's precise, the exact degree of warmth expected of someone praised in print. Behind them, the porch balusters cast shadows like piano keys on the steps. A planter overflowed with red geraniums, lush and photogenic in a way that made color feel like a promise. "Nice place," said Talia, passing through with a bowl of cereal. Milk winked at the rim as she moved. She peered at the photo, then at the column. "They get awards for being nice now?" "Some do," Maria said, not taking her eyes from the page. Talia shrugged and drifted on. Somewhere down the hall, Ms. Alvarez coaxed a temperamental vacuum into cooperation. The sound rose and fell like a stern lullaby. Maria traced the edge of the photo with her fingertip. She didn't know why her attention stilled this way, except that the house looked like the kind you draw when you're 6. A peaked roof, 2 windows, a door in the middle, and the couple looked like people who woke each morning to a certainty she had only ever seen in catalogs. She read the first paragraph the way a person measures distance with their feet, slowly, to feel the ground. David and Caroline Richardson opened their home to adoption, accompanied the story inset like a locket. The couple in the same spot but at night, strings of lights blurring gently above them, their arms around a blonde toddler in a quilted jacket. The caption named a community event, thanked donors, promised more. The jacket had a tiny embroidered crown on the sleeve. The child's cheeks were round with weather and winter, a little lantern of a face turned toward the camera. Maria waited for the gravity in her chest to settle. She pinched the paper's corner to steady it and kept reading. "Our home is always open," Caroline says, gesturing to the sunroom where craft supplies await small hands. "We believe in family as a verb." The Richardsons live on a quiet cul-de-sac where neighbors describe them as the first to volunteer and the last to go home after cleanup. "They make everything beautiful," says a friend from their community group. "It's just who they are." It was the sentence about the sunroom that broke something small and carefully stacked inside Maria. Family as a verb. The phrase rang clever in the mouth. She imagined a long table under a skylight, jars of brushes lined like soldiers, paper unfurling in clean sheets. She pictured little handprints stamped in paint, each one a proof of presence. She tried to see Elena's hands among them and could not. The vision dissolved the way breath does on glass. Something about the picture didn't sit right, though the wrongness was quiet and polite. the way a chair wobbles only when you lean a certain way. The geraniums were too full for March. Maria had watched the shelter's little pocket garden through a winter that didn't want to unclench. The pansies had only just dared a few faces through the chill. In the photo, the red blossoms spilled summer in a month that hadn't earned it. A detail a stylist might ignore, a florist might fix, but a detail still. Her fingertip brushed the planter. Ink smudged faintly, leaving a red like a whisper on her skin. She read the next section carefully. The couple's journey began, as many do, with a call from a licensed agency. "We were matched quickly," David says. "It felt meant to be." Today they partner with organizations to promote ethical adoption and support birth mothers through their transition. "We want every story to be a win-win," Caroline says. The phrase matched bulletin board to her right. Flyers overlapped in a soft collage. Her eyes found the library notice again. The K-9 demonstration this week. Sergeant Davis and Ace. Someone had moved it higher, as if to keep it safe. She returned to the photograph, to the small things a camera didn't intend to tell. The way the woman's hand curled just slightly toward herself instead of out. The man's watch tilted to catch light. The porch swing's chain gleaming like it had been oiled for the occasion. The door behind them stood open a few inches, showing a slice of a hallway with a runner rug, stripes perfectly centered. Stagecraft that made domesticity look inevitable. "Do you want me to save the obits?" asked Ms. Alvarez, appearing with a stack of mail and a roll of tape. She glanced at the paper, at the headline. "Or are we collecting saints today?" "Neither," Maria said, then added, because Ms. Alvarez deserved more than one-word answers, "Just reading." Ms. Alvarez lowered herself onto the arm of the chair across from her, keys chiming softly. "They look like they iron their napkins." "They do," Maria said, a half smile touching her mouth and then retreating. "It's a nice porch." "It is." Ms. Alvarez's tone held no envy and no apology. "Porches are good for sitting through weather, good for neighbors." Maria nodded. The thought nested somewhere helpful. She returned to the column and finished it. Quotes from friends, a list of charities, a final line about building community, one child at a time. The words were clean, sanded of splinters. Nowhere did they mention the paper cuts of process, the way a signature could feel like a door closing softly on the other side of a hallway. She folded the paper along its original seam, and then, without meaning to, unfolded it again. The smaller photo had shifted slightly, wrinkling the thin border. She smoothed it with her palm. The child's jacket with the little crown, the swing with its blue cushions. The front steps swept clear as a conclusion. "Can I keep this page?" she asked, surprising herself. "You can keep the whole thing," Ms. Alvarez said, "but if you only want the page, I've got scissors that pretend to be sharp." Maria tore the tape on the counter and carried the mail to the office, humming under her breath. The tune drifted back as a washed-out ribbon, something from the radio, mended and mending. When the room settled, Maria touched the front pocket of her backpack where the flimsy rectangle lay. The page rustled softly under her fingers, paper against paper, the sound of thin things layered to become slightly more sturdy. She thought of the geraniums too early, of the staged open door, of the watch angled to catch light. Small things, yes, but small things have a way of aligning themselves into lines you can follow if you pay attention long enough. "Bus in 5, called Talia from the hallway. Someone laughed about a pop quiz. The morning shifted forward on its ordinary hinge. Maria stood, the couch releasing her like a sigh, and slung the backpack over one shoulder. The weight of the newspaper page settled against the weight of the notebook, and beneath both, the bracelet curved where she had tucked it the night before. Names, evidence, a letter beginning. She felt the shape of all of it, and, without yet knowing why, was grateful for the way they touched. On her way out, she paused by the bulletin board and put a small green dot beside the library flyer's date. No one would notice. It was enough that she had. Outside, the air carried a clean edge that suggested the day was ready to be clear if asked. She stepped into it, the door whispering shut behind her, and let the light find her face the way a porch light finds a key returning to a lock. Something about the picture in her bag still felt staged, but the feeling itself was real. And real, she was learning, was where the next true step began. The first week, Maria checked the mail slot by the shelter office every afternoon, as faithfully as some people say grace. The slot was a brass mouth in a blue door, and when Ms. Alvarez opened it with her key, a drift of flyers and envelopes slid into a wire basket beneath. Maria learned the sound of it the way you learn the gait of someone you love, a quick rasp, a soft thud. She learned, too, how to keep her face still when the basket yielded only bills and coupons and a glossy postcard for a furniture outlet promising comfort in 3 easy payments. "They'll send photos and letters," the counselor had said. The words had felt like a bridge then. Calico. She told herself it would be waiting regardless. A letter wasn't a mayfly. It could survive an extra 10 minutes. By the end of the second week, she no longer stood in the doorway to watch the sorting. She took a seat on the bench beneath the bulletin board and waited while Ms. Alvarez did the sensible thing, made piles, clipped notes, taped the free clinic hours where everyone could see them. "Nothing for you today, mija," Ms. Alvarez would say gently, as if Maria might be measuring herself against the size of the stack. Maria nodded, thanked her, and went to the study room as if she had planned it that way all along. She wrote the first letter the night she realized waiting was a practice, not a single act. It began simply on notebook paper with a faint blue spine of lines, the way a person begins a walk by choosing a door. "My name is Maria. I'm your mother. Today the sky over the shelter was the color of a spoon left in the sink, and the maple outside let go of 2 more seeds." She wrote standing at the kitchen counter because the tables were full of algebra and laughter. She folded the page into thirds as if it were already stamped and addressed. Then she slid it into a shoebox under her bed, the one that had once held a pair of hand-me-down sneakers and now was lined with tissue paper like a small museum. She wrote another the next day, quick at first, then slower when the sentences began to feel like threads that could tangle if she pulled too hard. She described the peppermint tea and the hum of the vending machine, the way the couch sighed when you stood up. She told the truth about small things because small things were what she could offer without varnish. "You liked the lullaby with the moon. I can't sing it yet without my voice doing that thing it does, but I hum the part about the field." At the end of the week, she bought a pack of envelopes with the coins she'd saved from sweeping the front walk and mopping the hallway on Saturdays. She addressed the first to the agency's post office box, the number copied from a pamphlet that smiled with other people's families. She left the return line blank. She stood before the blue mailbox on the corner and fed the envelope into its mouth. It slid from her fingers too easily, like something that hadn't been meant to be held. Days lengthened. The light held on in the evenings like a guest reluctant to leave. The geraniums outside the Richardson house would have been legitimate by now, she thought, rocked the love seat like a cat. Her tone held curiosity without hunger. "Not yet," Maria said. Talia nodded like a person agreeing with the weather. "You'll tell me if you want to," she said, and then launched into a story about a bus driver who gave out mints with an air of ceremony. The story made room for Maria's silence inside it, which was its own kind of kindness. When the first month turned into the second, Maria adjusted the ritual so it didn't injure her. Check the basket only on Mondays, then on Wednesdays, then on Fridays if the week had been gentle. On other days she wrote. The letters curled in the shoebox like a warm animal sleeping, docile, breathing. She numbered them in the top right corner and dated the bottom. It mattered to her that there be an order, a way for someone later to see a path through the thicket. Sometimes she wrote to Elena at 5 in the morning when the shelter was still, the sound of distant traffic a kind of ocean. Sometimes at 11 at night when the lights in the hallway cast long shapes, and the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner from the mopped floors. She wrote the day the library hosted the canine demonstration, and the dog named Ace sat with the patience of a monk while children took turns asking if he liked peanut butter. She wrote how Sergeant Davis had explained scent like a kind of memory, molecules carried in air the way stories are carried in families. A dog can find what is hidden because the world leaves traces of itself wherever it has been. She wrote that down twice, not because Elena would need to hear it once more, but because Maria did. On a Thursday in June, the agency answered her voicemail with a voicemail, a cheerful voice thanking her for reaching out. The message apologized for a minor delay in correspondence and promised to expedite the first update. The phrases were dressed in business casual. Maria listened to it 3 times, then saved it, as if the repetition could make it less general and more about an actual child who had once fit into her arms like a word that finally found its right place in a sentence. She put the phone on the bed beside the shoebox and opened the lid. The letters inside had made their own weight. She lifted the top one and read the last line. "I hope you like the sound of rain on the roof when you're ropes," and tucked a daisy behind one ear. Later she wrote to Elena about the daisy, about how it made the girl walk taller, as if flowers could lend you their posture. "Mail," Ms. Alvarez said one afternoon, lifting the brass flap with her key. 3 envelopes slid into the basket, 2 addressed to residents who had already moved on, 1 to the shelter itself. Nothing for Maria. Ms. Alvarez didn't say the line that had become their refrain. She simply set the pile on the counter and pressed a peppermint into Maria's hand. "For the walk to the library," she offered, as if errands required rewards. "I'll bring you back the mystery novel," Maria said, "the one with the lighthouse on the cover." "Only if the ending is kind," Ms. Alvarez said, and made a face that meant she knew stories didn't take requests. On the way to the library, Maria passed the blue mailbox. She paused and took an envelope from her bag. Inside was a copy of a letter she had already sent, addressed this time to the Richardsons at the number listed in the newspaper as their street address. She had hesitated for days about writing it, worried she was stepping out of line, worried she was stepping too carefully inside it, but the worry felt less heavy than doing nothing. She slid the envelope into the slot. The metal clanged softly like a polite bell. She stood a second longer, her hand on the cool paint, then stepped back. That night she dreamed of a porch swing moving in a wind that wasn't wind, the cushions a familiar blue. She woke before dawn with the taste of air in her mouth and the surety that she had heard a car door open somewhere far away. She sat up and pulled the shoebox onto her lap. The letters smelled faintly of paper and peppermint. She fanned them the way you fan cards, then tucked them back, edges aligned, as if neatness could convince them to become what they were pretending to be. By the 3rd month she stopped announcing to herself that she was waiting. It had become the water she swam in, the way a person moves through a room without noting each table and chair. She learned other names for time, the weekly rotation of pasta night and taco night, the cadence of the laundromat on the corner, Tuesdays less busy than Wednesdays, the margin notes in her notebook where a sentence for Elena would appear while she was taking down geometry theorems. She learned to keep a pen in her pocket the way some people keep a charm. We are the better for everyone. Maria ran her thumb along the photo's edge until the gloss dulled to a matte. She didn't cry. She put the magazine in the rack by the door where anyone could read it, a small and perhaps foolish act of faith that truth would make its own case in the open air. That evening she wrote a letter that started and ended in the same hour. No crossings out, no apologies. Some days the mailbox is only a box, and that's all right. On those days I remember your weight against me, and the way the word Elena feels when I say it in my head. It feels like a light I can cup. Today the sky cleared after rain, and the maple leaves shook themselves like dogs do when they come in from outside. A dog can find what's hidden, the officer said. I believe that. I believe you will find the things you need, and I will keep leaving small, honest pieces of our story where the world can reach them. If letters can be a bridge, I'll keep building. She dated it, folded it, and slid it into the shoebox where the others waited, thin but not empty, like pages of a book still being written. The box slid back under the bed with the soft sound of cardboard against wood, a sound she had come to recognize as an answer to a question no one else could hear. Then she lay on her side, one hand on the edge of the mattress where the floor began, and let sleep come like a tide, unhurried and sure, carrying her a little farther each time toward whatever shore would meet her in the morning. Saturday mornings at the shelter had a particular rhythm, like a song that always started with the same 3 notes: the rattle of the rolling cart with its wobbly wheel, the hiss of the coffee maker doing its best, and the front door's soft sigh each time it opened to let in a sliver of outside air. Maria liked Saturdays for their small industriousness. They gave her hands something to do: stacking bowls, folding hand towels, refilling the basket of fruit with apples that wore little stickers like badges. She was wiping down the common room table when the door sighed again, and a familiar voice breezed in with the air. "Morning, superstars," said Ruth, a volunteer who had a talent for making every room feel like it had a window where there wasn't one. She was in her 50s, a halo of gray curls escaping the bandana that it was more true than not. "Need help with anything?" "Always." Ruth slid her tote onto the table. "I brought in a stack of magazines for the lounge, gardening, travel, a puzzle book or 2, and some note cards. I thought maybe the girls could use them to write thank yous for the donated backpacks, or letters if there's someone who needs a letter." Her gaze flicked to Maria's face and then away again, like a bird landing and lifting. "Thank you," Maria said. She reached for the note cards. They were the kind with thin deckled edges and tiny pressed flowers in one corner. Their delicate certainty made her throat warm. They worked side by side for a while, the kind of togetherness that leaves room for thought. Ruth broke the quiet with little stories. The community garden's tomatoes were finally setting fruit. A neighbor's new puppy had learned to sit with the solemnity of a judge. The public library's air conditioning had given up midweek and been revived by a custodian with a gift for coaxing machines back into kindness. Nothing urgent, just the small proofs that a town continues to be a town. When the room was ready for lunch, Ruth rinsed the sponge and leaned against the counter, wringing it out with practiced hands. "I was at the library on Wednesday," she said, as if mentioning the weather. "Came late for the canine demonstration, but I caught the end. That dog, Ace, what a gentleman." She smiled. "You would have liked it." "I did," Maria said. "I went. The officer said dogs follow scent the way a person follows a story they know is true." "He would be right," Ruth said, pleased. She set the sponge aside and reached for a towel. The library was full that night. Families, some older folks. I ran into a girl I used to see around here a couple of years ago. Lily. Not her real name, she added, as if to lay a layer of gentleness over whatever might come next. She aged out of the shelter just before Christmas that year. Maria's hands stilled on the stack of napkins. Ruth wasn't a gossip. She presented people's lives like fragile bowls, offering them only if you showed you could carry them. "She had a baby," Ruth went on, "a little boy. This was last spring, maybe the one before. She was working with an agency, one of those that promises to hold your hand, and Lily wrote into that space instead. She showed me the notebook she keeps. Neat handwriting, little doodles of stars in the margins. She mails some, she keeps most." Maria could feel the rectangle of her own notebook in her backpack, the place where letters multiplied in orderly stacks. The likeness pricked and comforted at the same time. "She told me something else," Ruth said, lowering her voice so it rode under the room's ordinary clatter. "The day of the signing, she was supposed to have a counselor with her, someone to go over each page slowly, to make sure she knew what she was agreeing to. The counselor never came. The agency rep said there'd been a scheduling tangle. They had a window and they needed to use it. Lily said no one pushed her hand, but the room felt like it was tilted, like the pen would roll to the line whether she wanted it to or not. The image arrived in Maria's mind with a clean click, a tilted room, a pen that obeyed the slope. She thought of her own signature, uneven on lines that had blurred like a road seen through rain. "What agency?" she asked, keeping her voice small. Questions asked quietly are sometimes easier to answer. Ruth named it. The syllables landed exactly where Maria had expected them to. She folded one of the napkins into quarters, then into eighths, as if neatness could take the sting out of recognition. Does she still get anything? Not from them, Ruth said. She hears things through friends. Someone saw a photo on a church bulletin board, that kind of whisper. She told me she's thought of. Ruth paused, searching for a word that wasn't a hammer. She's thought of asking the library to host some kind of support circle. More than one girl had a story that didn't match the pamphlets, some with the same seal on the front. The same seal. Maria saw the embossed circle on the brochure she had folded and refolded until the paper tired of being obedient. She felt again the weightless weight of assurances spoken in rooms with stale coffee. A warmth rose in her that was not anger so much as clarity, the kind of light that comes when clouds shift and a field shows its shape. Ruth dried her hands and set the towel on the counter, her gaze moving to Maria's face and resting there. "If you want to meet her," she said simply, "I can ask her if that feels all right. No pressure, maybe soon." "Soon is also a full sentence," Ruth said, her smile steady. She reached into her tote and pulled out a slip of paper, sliding it across the table like a secret you earn by being careful. On it was a time and a place. The community room at the library, next Thursday, late afternoon. Birth-parent listening circle, the line read in simple black type. Below it a small note. No agenda, just stories and tea. "Tea," Maria repeated, a corner of her mouth lifting. "They know what they're doing." "They do," Ruth said. "And if you go, there's a dog park across the street. That gentleman Ace takes his handler through there sometimes. He has a way of making the world seem listenable." Maria tucked the slip of paper into the front pocket of her backpack, where the newspaper page lay and the notebook rested. The front pocket felt like a place where seeds were kept before planting. She pressed her palm against it, not to keep it in, but to say, "I see you." The room filled with the soft bustle of lunchtime. Girls lined up with their trays, the air fragrant with tomato soup and grilled cheese, a pairing that always tasted like being 9 and safe for half an hour. Ms. Alvarez moved through the line with her cheerful triage, adding extra crackers, swapping out a bruised apple for one that shone. When she passed Maria, she tapped the slip of paper through the canvas with a fingertip and shot her a glance that said she had noticed, and also that she knew when not to ask. They ate at the long table, shoulders not quite touching, conversations overlapping like lace. A pop quiz conquered, a little brother's recital, the bus route change that added 10 minutes to everyone's morning. Maria listened and let the sounds braid themselves into something that held. Under the table, the toe of her shoe found the shoebox in her imagination and nudged it, a small nod to a thing that had been heavy and might, with time, become less so. After lunch, she rinsed bowls at the sink. The water ran warm, then hotter, then settled into the exact kind of heat that made grease let go. Through the window over the sink, the maple lifted its hands to the sky, fingers spread. A breeze came through the screen and moved a tendril of hair at Maria's temple. She smoothed it back, feeling oddly like the day had reached out and touched her just to see if she was here. On a minute. She looked at the sentence and didn't cross it out. Then she added another. "If dogs can follow what's true through a tangle, maybe people can too." She closed the notebook and placed it on the table, palm open on the cover, as if feeling for a heartbeat. The slip of paper pressed lightly against her thigh through the backpack fabric. "Soon," she had said. The word sat comfortably beside her, not rushing, not shrinking. A good word for building. Outside, a cloud shifted and sunlight laid a generous square on the floor by her feet. She moved her shoe into it, the leather warming under the light, and let the square hold her there for a breath longer than she strictly needed. Then, with the care of a person learning to follow quiet instructions, she picked up her pen again and began another letter. Saturday mornings at the shelter always began with the smell of coffee and the low thump of canned goods being stacked in the pantry. The day felt slower than the rest of the week, like it had been unrolled carefully. Maria had volunteered to help in the kitchen, rinsing apples and lining them on paper towels so the younger kids could grab them before they went soft. The front door opened with its usual sigh, and in came Pastor Elaine, one of the Saturday volunteers. She wasn't an actual pastor, but everyone called her that. Something about the way she listened made you feel like you could hand her your heaviest thought, and she wouldn't flinch. She carried 2 grocery bags hooked over her arms, a bouquet of parsley sticking out of one like a green flag. "Well, the farmer's market was kind today," she said, setting the bags on the counter. "Fresh bread, some greens, even a few jars of honey from Mr. Lindstrom's hives." Maria smiled, taking the bread and tucking it into the pantry. "You always bring the good stuff." "It's easier when people trust you," Elaine said, brushing a few crumbs from her sleeve. "Though trust is one of those things you have to keep earning." She moved easily around the kitchen, chatting about the weather, about a new mural going up downtown, about a dog she'd seen that looked half cloud, half sheep. And then, almost as if it was just another piece of small talk, she added, "I ran into an old friend of the shelter this week. Do you remember a girl named Jenna? She stayed here." She believed them. They made it sound so clear, so kind. For a while she did get updates, pictures of him in little knitted hats, smiling in a park. And then she paused to rinse her hands at the sink. The photos stopped. The agency told her the family needed space to adjust, but months passed. Every time she called, they said they'd pass along her message. She hasn't heard anything in almost a year. The running water was the only sound in the room. Maria set down the towel she'd been using, the damp edge cool against her palm. She tried to ask about her rights, Elaine continued, but they kept telling her she'd signed everything. And the more she pressed, the less they answered. "Which agency?" Maria asked, her voice quiet, though she already suspected. Elaine named it, and the syllables landed with a weight Maria recognized in her bones. She said the day she signed the papers, she was supposed to have a counselor walk her through it, Elaine said, shaking her head. But the counselor was unavailable. The agency rep told her it was just standard paperwork, nothing to worry about, and rushed her through it. She told me later she barely remembered what the room looked like, only that it felt like the walls were leaning in. Maria thought of the hospital room where she had signed her own papers, how the lights had hummed, how the pen had felt heavier than it should, how the words had blurred into shapes she couldn't hold on to. The similarity made her chest feel tight. Elaine began gathering the parsley into bunches, her hands steady. "Jenna's doing okay now. She's working at a daycare, has her own little apartment. But she carries it with her. I could see it in the way she talked about him, like she was keeping his place set at the table in her mind." Maria reached for another apple, running her thumb over its smooth skin. "She never got anything back? No letters at all?" "Not from them," Elaine said. "She writes him every month anyway. Keeps the letters in a shoebox under her bed." She glanced up. "Reminds me of someone else I know." Maria felt the heat rise to her face. She didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. The shoebox under her own bed was heavier than it looked, full of words that had nowhere to go. Elaine wiped her hands on a dish at it. The words settled into Maria's mind like a stone finding its place at the bottom of a river. No splash, just a quiet permanence. The kitchen filled again with small, ordinary sounds, the soft rip of bread being unwrapped, the squeak of a cupboard door, the faint laughter from the common room. Maria finished drying the apples and began lining them in a bowl. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as if each one was a way to keep from spilling the thoughts building in her chest. As Elaine packed up her tote, she slipped a small folded flyer onto the counter. "The library's starting a monthly gathering for birth parents. No agenda, just stories and tea. It's next Thursday. If you go, you might see Jenna there." Maria glanced at the flyer. The words were printed in plain black ink, nothing fancy. But the date caught her eye. Soon enough to feel real. far enough to give her time to decide. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all you need to do for now," Elaine replied, and with a warm smile, she left the kitchen to deliver the bread to the dining room. Maria stood for a moment with the flyer in her hand. She didn't put it in her pocket right away. Instead, she let herself trace the edge of the paper, the way she sometimes traced Elena's name on the bracelet hidden in her hoodie. It felt like holding a key she wasn't ready to use yet, but that she might one day need. She slipped the flyer into her backpack, alongside the folded newspaper clipping and the notebook of letters. The pocket felt heavier, but in a way that made her straighten her shoulders. In the common room, the noise of lunchtime had begun to swell, trays clinking, chairs scraping, the hum of conversation. Maria joined the line, the smell of soup drifting toward her, and found herself thinking of Jenna, someone she hadn't met, but who seemed to know the same silence, the same waiting. And as she picked up her tray, Maria realized that silence didn't always mean nothing was happening. Sometimes it meant the story was still gathering itself, waiting for the moment it would need to be told. The adoption agency's office sat in a brick building on the edge of downtown, squeezed between a dry cleaner and a bakery whose window display was a polite riot of eclairs and sugar-dusted pastries. From the parenting magazines, and a single vase of artificial tulips. A framed poster on the far wall read, "Every child deserves a loving home," its font the same warm serif as the hours on the door. Behind the reception desk sat a woman with tidy hair and a cardigan the color of oatmeal. She was typing quickly, her eyes fixed on the screen until Maria stepped forward. "Hi," Maria said, her voice level. "I was wondering if you offer any counseling for birth mothers, or maybe know of a support group." The receptionist's expression didn't change at first. She reached for a notepad. "We have a few options," she said, tone professionally pleasant. "Can I get your name?" Maria hesitated a fraction too long before answering. "Maria Alvarez." She wasn't sure why she didn't give her full name, the one on the papers, but she let it stand. The receptionist scribbled it down, then looked up. "When was your placement?" "A little over a year ago," Maria said. She forced her voice into the easy tone she'd practiced. "It was with the Richardsons." The pen in the woman's hand paused mid-stroke. It was the kind of pause that lasted barely a second, but made the air feel heavier. She glanced down at the paper, then back at Maria, her professional smile tightening just slightly, as if it had been cinched at the edges. "The Richardsons," she repeated, the words careful, like she was tasting them before deciding what to do with them. Maria caught that flicker, something between hesitation and calculation, and stored it away. She didn't break eye contact. "Yes, Caroline and David Richardson." She let the names land with the same weight she'd heard them given in the newspaper profile. The receptionist cleared her throat. "Of course," she said, her voice smoothing over the pause. "I'll just need to check our current resources for birth parents." She tapped the edge of her notepad with the pen, then set it down entirely. "Can you wait here a moment?" Maria nodded. "Sure." The woman disappeared through a side door, her shoes making soft clicks on the tile. From her seat, Maria could see only the edge of another hallway, pale walls lined with certificates in gold frames. She strained to catch voices, but all she heard was the low hum of a copier from somewhere deeper in the building. Post-placement. Maria glanced at the flyer, just a name, an address, a phone number. It looked like something printed on a home office printer, the ink slightly uneven. "Is this the only option?" Maria asked. "For now," the receptionist replied, folding her hands. "But I'm sure they can connect you to more resources once you reach out." Maria let her eyes linger on the woman's face, on the way her gaze kept sliding just slightly off-center, never quite meeting hers for more than a second at a time. "Do the Richardsons still work with your agency?" she asked casually, as if it were a passing thought. The receptionist's hands tightened slightly where they rested on the desk. "I'm not at liberty to discuss specific adoptive families," she said, the words clipped but wrapped in the soft packaging of policy. "I understand," Maria said, though she let the sentence hang open enough to invite more. But the woman only offered the faintest smile and reached for her pen again, a quiet sign that the conversation was over. Maria took the flyer and stood. "Thanks for your help," she said. "Of course," the receptionist replied. "Best of luck." The phrase had a finality to it, like the closing of a file. Outside, the cold air hit Maria's cheeks, waking her fully from the warmth of the office. She crossed the street without looking back, though in her mind she still saw the exact second the receptionist's pen had stopped mid-stroke. That pause said more than anything written on the flyer. At the corner she passed the bakery. The scent of fresh bread and sugar drifted out as someone opened the door. Maria thought briefly about going in, about buying something just to warm her hands. But she kept walking, the flyer folded in her pocket. She knew now that the Richardsons' name carried weight here, not just recognition, but something heavier, something people decided quickly whether or not to speak about. That hesitation, that brief tightening of a smile. She had seen it before, in other rooms, when people chose what to say and what to leave unsaid. By the time she reached the bus stop, Maria had decided the counseling center might be worth visiting, not because she thought it would give her the help she'd asked for, but because she wanted to see if their pauses matched the ones she'd just witnessed. She sat on the bench, pulling her hoodie tighter against emerging, carrying forward Maria's quiet suspicions and building the tension through another encounter that starts to connect her story with others. "Would you like me to continue?" The rain had been steady all afternoon, soft enough not to be urgent but constant enough to thread itself into the background of everything. In the shelter's common room, the overhead lights hummed faintly, and the air smelled of damp jackets draped over the backs of chairs. Maria sat at the long table with a mug of tea, her notebook open to a half-finished letter she'd been writing in slow, careful sentences. She was halfway through describing the way the maple outside the window held beads of rain like tiny glass buttons when the chair across from her scraped back. A girl about her age, maybe a year older, sat down, her hair still wet from the walk-in. She had the kind of tired eyes Maria recognized from mirrors. "Kayla," she said, offering a small smile as she rubbed her hands together for warmth. "Maria," she replied, closing her notebook just enough to keep the page private. They sat in a companionable quiet for a minute. Kayla's hands wrapped around the steaming mug Ms. Alvarez had brought her. The rain softened against the windows. "I heard you asking about counseling the other day," Kayla said, not accusing, just stating. "I did that once. Went to the agency's office." Maria looked up, surprised. "Which agency?" Kayla tilted her head. "Suncrest." The name landed with a thud Maria felt more than heard. She took a slow sip of tea. "That's where I went too." Kayla's expression shifted, recognition, then something sharper, like a puzzle piece finding its edge. "Did you?" She didn't finish the sentence. Maria nodded once. "A little over a year ago." They studied each other across the table. It was the kind of study that wasn't about faces but about looking for matching scars, invisible unless you knew where to look. Kayla set her mug down carefully, as if not to spill anything important. "When I went in, I thought I had time. My aunt was supposed to be there. She said she'd help me read everything. But the agency called the night before and said there was a scheduling issue, that it would be fine for me to come alone. They'd walk me through it. When I got there, the caseworker already had the papers laid out. She said it would go faster if I just initialed where she pointed. Couldn't wait. It felt like the clock in the room was running too fast and I was the only one who noticed." Kayla nodded slowly. "That's exactly how it felt. Like the room tilted in their direction." She hesitated. "They told me not to call my aunt until after everything was signed. Said it would just confuse the process if too many people got involved." Maria's hands curled around her mug. "They told me my mom was too emotional to help me decide. She didn't even know I was in labor until after." The rain outside seemed louder now, as if it was leaning in. Kayla shifted in her seat. Did they promise you updates? Yes, Maria said. Letters, photos, maybe visits later on. Same, Kayla said. I got one letter, no photos, and then nothing. She let out a bitter laugh. When I asked, they said the family needed time to settle in. That was almost 2 years ago. Maria thought of the flyer folded in her bag from the counseling center, the receptionist's pause when she'd said the Richardson name. What was your family's name? Landon, Kayla said. David and Caroline Landon. Why? Maria shook her head slightly. Mine was Richardson, but... She reached into her notebook, tore a scrap from the back page, and wrote Claire Jennings in block letters. It's the same caseworker. That's not an accident. Kayla stared at the name on the paper as if committing it to memory. She always had this way of making you feel like you owed her something, smiling like she was giving you a gift. And if you asked too many questions, the smile got tighter, Maria added. They sat in silence for a moment, the scrape of a chair somewhere across the room the only interruption. I've been thinking, Kayla said slowly, about how many girls she's done this to. How many of us were told we had no time, no choice, that the papers were just formality. Maria met her eyes. It's not just us. Kayla leaned back, her hands curling into the sleeves of her sweater. When I left the agency that day, I told myself I'd made the right choice. I believed them. I really did. But now, I can't stop wondering how much of what they said was even true. Maria thought of her shoebox under the bed, the neat stack of letters to Elena, each one dated, each her pocket. Kayla watched her, then reached across the table. If you ever want to compare notes, she said, I'll tell you everything I remember. Dates, names, whatever I have. Maria nodded. I'll do the same. It wasn't a plan yet, but it was more than silence. It was a thread, and sometimes that's how you start, to pull and see what unravels. When Kayla left to meet a friend, Maria stayed at the table, her pen poised above the paper. She didn't write a letter this time. She wrote a list. At the top, Claire Jennings, caseworker. Landon family, Kayla's placement. Richardson family, my placement. Promised updates, broken. She stared at the list, at the symmetry of their stories. The pattern was there now, not in her imagination but in ink. And patterns, once visible, are harder to ignore. Outside, the rain began again in earnest, streaking the windows, blurring the view of the street beyond. Maria closed her notebook and wrapped her hands around her mug, letting the heat sink into her palms. Somewhere in the quiet, a new thought took root. Maybe the agency wasn't just careless. Maybe it was careful in a way that was meant to keep certain things hidden. She would find out. The shelter was quieter than usual that evening, the kind of quiet that comes after a long rain when the air feels rinsed and tired. Maria sat cross-legged on her bed, the shoebox of letters in front of her. Around her, the room's familiar details, the scuffed paint by the window, the thin hum of the hallway light, seemed sharper, as if the day's conversation with Kayla had tuned her senses to a different frequency. The lid of the shoebox came off with a small sign of cardboard. Inside, the letters lay in neat stacks, each folded along the same creases, each marked with a date in the top corner. They had been her only act of defiance until now, words written to Elena, even if they never reached her. But tonight, she knew they were no longer enough. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote at the top, Elena, find her. The words looked stark and plain, but they hummed with a quiet voltage. From her backpack, she took the scrap of paper where she'd written Claire Jennings during her talk with Kayla. She set it beside the list she'd begun, overlapped like shadowed transparencies. She thought about the way Kayla had looked at her across the table, like someone who had been living with a splinter they could never quite reach until they realized someone else had the same one. That look had lodged in Maria's mind, an anchor against the current of doubt that usually pulled her under. She opened her notebook to a clean page and began a second list, this one for action. Gather every name connected to my case. Find Kayla again. Compare details. Look up public records for Richardson adoption. Track any mention of Claire Jennings. Check if the agency's license and staff list are public. She underlined the last one twice. On impulse, she reached for the newspaper clipping she'd kept from the common room weeks ago. The Richardsons on their perfect porch, smiling like they'd never had to rush a single decision in their lives. She studied the background again. The high chair tucked into shadow, the faint reflection in the front window. She took a pen and circled the high chair, then scribbled in the margin. Proof Elena was still with them when the photo was taken. Maria's hand moved almost without her thinking, drawing lines between the pieces. Richardson photo, date of article, date of placement. She remembered something Ruth had said in passing about local fundraisers often being mentioned in the community section of the paper. Maybe the Richardsons had been photographed by others. Maybe Elena had been there too, just out of focus. Her pulse picked up. She dug into the bottom of her backpack for the old shelter computer sign-up sheet, the one she used when she needed to check job postings or print homework. Tomorrow she would use one of her hours to search the newspaper archives. She didn't care if it took weeks. Every photo, every mention was a breadcrumb. Beside her, the shoebox still lay open. She picked up one of the earliest letters to Elena, dated just days after the hospital. The paper was soft now, worn from being unfolded and refolded. She read the first lines silently, then tucked it back in place, more gently than before. It wasn't just a letter anymore. It was evidence of her intent, proof that she had never let go willingly. She found a manila envelope in the desk drawer and began sliding her lists, the newspaper clipping, and the spare scraps into it. Had called when? What had been said and what had not? The clock in the hallway ticked past 9, but Maria didn't feel tired. She felt aligned, the way you do when you finally name something you've been circling for months. Through the thin wall, she could hear the muffled sound of two girls laughing in the next room, the static of someone's radio between stations. Ordinary life. But under it, Maria felt the new hum of her own plan taking shape. She slipped the manila envelope under her pillow, not because she thought anyone would take it, but because it felt wrong to leave it across the room. Tomorrow she would add to it. Anything Kayla remembered, anything she could pull from public records, anything that might lead to a street address instead of a P.O. box. She imagined Elena as she might be now, bigger, steadier on her feet, maybe speaking a handful of words. The thought brought a sharp ache, but also a clarity. Her daughter wasn't an abstract idea in a file. She was a person living somewhere under the same sky, breathing the same air. And Maria could not, would not, accept that she was unreachable. Before turning off the lamp, she picked up her pen one last time and wrote across the bottom of her action list. No more waiting for someone else to do the right thing. The ink bled slightly into the paper, as if to root the words deeper. Maria slid the list into the envelope, lay back against her pillow, and let the weight of it anchor her. Outside, the rain had stopped, but drops still clung to the edges of the shelter's windows, catching the light from the street lamps. She thought about how water always found its way through, seeping into cracks, tracing the path of least resistance until it reached where it meant to go. She closed her eyes with that image in her mind, and for the first time in a long while, the thought of tomorrow felt less like another day to endure, and more like the next step in a trail she was finally learning how to follow. The folding chairs in the Oak Ridge Community Center had been set up in neat rows, but by the time Maria arrived, people were already spilling into the aisles. Parents with strollers, older neighbors leaning on canes, teenagers slouched in hoodies at the back. The flyer had said Youth Safety Night, and Maria had almost crumpled it and thrown it away. But something in the date circled on her calendar, a circle she had, bottle and a police cap. The man who would later be introduced as Sergeant Davis stood near the podium, speaking quietly with another officer. Even from the back, Maria noticed the way he scanned the room, like he was taking in more than faces, seeing the spaces between people, the small movements most eyes skipped over. The meeting began with predictable topics: curfews, better lighting near the playground, a reminder to lock bikes in the schoolyard. Parents asked about loitering outside the 7-Eleven. Someone complained about noisy cars racing on the main road. Maria tried to listen, but her attention kept drifting back to the man in uniform when it was his turn to speak. He didn't raise his voice for authority. He kept it steady, almost conversational, like he wanted people to hear him rather than just obey. He spoke about building trust with the youth in the community, about noticing when something felt off before it became a headline. And then, almost in passing, he mentioned a department initiative looking into irregularities in local adoption practices after a string of complaints from young mothers. The words dropped into Maria's chest like a stone breaking the surface of still water. She sat up straighter. No one in the room seemed to react much. There were coughs, the shuffle of papers, but Maria's heart was thudding so loudly she was sure someone would notice. After the meeting wrapped, neighbors drifted toward the coffee urn at the side table or formed little knots of conversation in the aisles. Sergeant Davis removed his cap, tucking it under his arm, and stepped down from the front. A couple of parents stopped him to shake his hand. He answered each with the same even tone, never rushing them along. Maria stayed in her seat, waiting until the space between him and the door was clear. Her palms were damp against the scarf-wrapped shoebox. She thought about turning away, about carrying it all back to the shelter and convincing herself it was better to wait. But waiting had gotten her nothing but silence and unanswered promises. When he finally stepped into the aisle alone, she rose and moved toward him, her steps quieter than her pulse. "Sergeant Davis?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. He turned toward her. "Yes?" She swallowed. "My name's Maria. She hesitated, glancing down at fingers working at the knot of the scarf. "I've been keeping everything I have. Names, dates, letters I wrote to my daughter. Things people told me. It's not much, but it's all I've got." He didn't rush her. He waited while she unwound the scarf and lifted the lid. Inside, the letters lay in their tidy stacks, next to scraps of paper covered in blocky handwriting, a folded newspaper clipping, the thin file of her own adoption paperwork. She took out the folded clipping first, the Richardsons on their porch, and placed it on top. "That's the family my daughter went to, Caroline and David Richardson. The agency promised I'd get letters and photos. They never came." She hesitated, then added, "I've met 2 other girls from the same agency. Different families, same caseworker, same broken promises." He studied the clipping, then glanced at the notes scattered among the letters. "And you've been keeping track of all this yourself?" "I didn't know who else would," she said simply. "But when you said there were complaints—" She trailed off, afraid to hope too hard. Davis's gaze was steady. "I can't promise what this will turn into, but I can promise I'll look at it. Every page." He paused, then added, "If you're willing, I might have more questions later, and I might want to connect you with someone else who's been through this. It can help to have more than one voice telling the same truth." Maria thought of Kayla, of the way her list had grown just in the last few days. "I can do that," she said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, jotting her name and the shelter's phone number. "I'll make a copy of anything you give me so you don't lose your originals," he said. "And Maria?" She looked up. "Keeping all this, names, dates, details, that's the work of an investigator," he said. "You've already started." The words startled her, not because she thought they were untrue, but because no one had framed what she'd been doing that way before. She'd thought of it as survival, or maybe obsession. The idea that it might be the beginning of something bigger set her heart beating in a different rhythm. She rewrapped the box in the scarf and stood. "When should I—" "I'll be in touch within a few days," he said. You've taken the hardest step already. As she came, it didn't. It felt quiet. The doors swung open, letting in a gust of crisp air and the sound of nails clicking on tile. Sergeant Davis stepped inside, his uniform jacket zipped to the collar, and beside him moved a tall, alert German shepherd in a black harness marked with bold yellow letters, Police K9. The dog's stride was purposeful but unhurried, his ears swiveling slightly at every sound. Maria's fingers tightened on the box. "Maria," Davis said with a small nod, "this is Ace." The dog looked at her for a moment, dark eyes steady, assessing without a hint of threat, then shifted his attention to the scarf-wrapped box. "I thought we could start here," Davis said, pulling out a chair across from her. "Sometimes Ace can pick up on trace scents, things most of us would never notice. If anything in your documents has a scent linked to a person or place in our other files, it could give us a lead." Maria unwound the scarf and set the lid aside. The letters, clippings, and scraps lay neatly inside. "That's all I've been able to collect," she said quietly. Davis glanced at the arrangement. "We'll go one at a time." He gave a quiet hand signal. Ace stepped forward, his nose lowering toward the box. The shift in his focus was almost visible, muscles tightening slightly, ears angled forward, the kind of attention that made the rest of the room seem to fade. Maria lifted the first stack of letters and set them on the table. Ace sniffed them thoroughly, his breathing slow and deliberate, then looked back at Davis without much reaction. Davis gave a small shake of his head. No match, or at least nothing strong enough to note. They moved through a few more items, the newspaper clipping, a page of her own notes, the folded flyer from the agency. Ace was attentive but calm, moving from one to the next without lingering. It was when Maria reached into the bottom of the box and pulled out an old manila envelope, creased at the corners, its flap worn soft, that something shifted. Ace's head came up slightly as she lifted it. The moment she set it on the table, he leaned in, nose working in quick, sharp bursts. His tail gave one slow sweep, then another. He circled to the side, sniffing again, focusing on the flap where the expression unreadable but intent. Ace is reacting to her scent, which means it's distinct enough in our system to flag. She's been in other case files. Maria blinked. "Other complaints?" He didn't answer directly, but the set of his jaw told her enough. He made a note in his small black book, writing quickly. "We'll run this through and see what matches come back. If she's been involved in multiple questionable adoptions, this could tie them together." Ace settled back on his haunches, still glancing at the envelope as if he wasn't quite done with it. Maria smoothed the flap with her fingers, feeling the roughness of the paper under her skin. "I almost didn't keep this," she admitted. "It was just part of the stack they gave me at the hospital. I didn't think it would matter." "Sometimes the thing that matters most doesn't look important at first," Davis said. "That's why you hold on to everything." He praised Ace with a quiet, firm, "Good work," and gave him a small reward from a pouch on his belt. The dog took it gently, then sat at Davis's side, eyes still bright and watchful. Maria studied Ace for a moment. "He knew before you did, didn't he?" Davis smiled faintly. "He knew before I opened my mouth. Dogs like Ace read the world through scent the way we read it through words. Every place, every person leaves a trail. You just need the right nose to follow it." She thought of her own trail, letters in a shoebox, names on scraps of paper, the faint outline of a puzzle whose picture she couldn't quite see yet. Maybe now, with Ace, the pieces would start to connect. They went through the rest of the box, but nothing drew Ace's focus the way that envelope had. When they were done, Davis carefully returned the items to their places, the manila envelope on top. "I'll get this copied and logged," he said. "You keep the original. Never give up your only copy of anything." Maria nodded, tucking the envelope back into the box like it was a fragile photograph. As they stood, Ace leaned slightly toward the box again, giving one last sniff as if to confirm his find. Then he turned toward the door, ready for whatever came next. Davis adjusted his cap. "This is a start," he said. "It's not proof yet, but it's something we can follow. And Maria, most people in your position don't have the day." Though now it was quiet except for the occasional tap of Sergeant Davis's pen against his notebook. The shoebox sat between him and Maria on the table, its lid pushed back, the manila envelope with Claire Jennings on top like a headline neither of them could ignore. Davis had been leafing slowly through Maria's notes, pausing every so often to scribble in his book. He didn't ask questions right away. He seemed to be matching the pieces in his head first, lining them up against something only he could see. When he finally looked up, his expression was steady, but there was a sharper focus in his eyes. "Maria, I need to tell you something. The name on this envelope, it's not new to me." Her pulse kicked up. "Claire?" He nodded. "We've had 3 other complaints involving her in the past 2 years. Different birth mothers, different adoptive families. But the patterns..." He tapped the edge of the envelope. "The patterns are almost identical to what you've described. Rushed paperwork, isolating the mother from any outside support, promises of ongoing contact that disappear once the placement is finalized." Maria gripped the edge of the table. "And nothing was done?" "Not nothing," he said, his voice even, "but not enough. Each case on its own didn't have the evidence to move forward. A lot of it came down to conflicting accounts, her word against theirs, and the agency's paperwork to back her up. Without something that ties them together, it's hard to make it stick." She looked down at the neat stacks of her letters, her notes, the clipping of the Richardsons on their porch. "So now you have 4. He gave a small nod. 4 is harder to ignore. The weight of his words settled into the air between them. Maria felt the smallest shift inside her. Not relief exactly, but the sense that the ground beneath her had stopped tilting, even if just a little. "I'm going to open a formal inquiry," Davis said. "It means gathering every piece of documentation we can. Your notes, your original paperwork, any communication from the agency. It also means I'll need to talk to the others, compare timelines, see if we can map out the overlap. If there's a larger network here, we have to show it." Maria hesitated. "Will they know it's me? The agency? The Richardsons?" His gaze didn't waver. Reached for the newspaper clipping and studied it again, his pen poised above his notebook. "This picture, do you remember when it ran?" "About 6 months after the adoption," Maria said. "I saw it in the common room at the shelter. That's why I kept it." "Smart," he said. "We can cross-check the event date with the agency's placement records. If Elena was with them then, and the Richardsons were still doing public events, there's a chance someone else saw her. A neighbor, a guest, someone who remembers." Maria traced the edge of the clipping with her finger. "Do you think they'd let me see her?" Davis didn't answer right away. When he did, it was careful. "Right now, my focus is on making sure no one can make her disappear from the record. We get the truth documented, and then we see where it takes us." She nodded, though her throat felt tight. He closed his notebook and set the pen on top. "I'll be in touch within the week. I might need to meet you here again, or at the station if you're comfortable. And if you remember anything at all, even if it seems small, write it down immediately. Details fade faster than you think." Maria gave a small, almost wry smile. "I've been writing everything down for a year." "That's why we have a chance," Davis said simply. Ace, who had been lying quietly at Davis's feet, lifted his head as if sensing the close of the conversation. His ears tilted toward Maria, eyes warm and direct. She met his gaze for a moment, strangely reassured by it. Davis stood, tucking his notebook into his jacket. "One more thing," he said. "Once we start this, you're part of the investigation. I'll protect your privacy, but it also means you might hear things that are hard to carry. If that happens, you tell me. You don't carry it alone." Maria glanced at the shoebox, its lid now back in place. I haven't been carrying it alone since yesterday, she said quietly. He gave a short nod, then motioned for Ace. The dog rose smoothly to his feet, the quiet jingle of his collar the only sound as they headed for the door. Maria stayed seated until she heard the door close and the echo of their steps fade down the hall. Then she pulled her scarf over the shoebox again, not warm and harmless. Sergeant Davis didn't buy it. Neither did Ace. The German Shepherd had been restless from the moment they turned into the lot, shifting in the back seat of the cruiser, nose pressed to the glass. As soon as the door opened, Ace leapt out, tail low but wagging with focus, the way he did when he was on scent. He circled the entrance twice, nostrils flaring, then paused at the door, giving it a deliberate nudge with his muzzle. Maria stood back, scarf pulled tight around her throat against the wind, watching. She'd told them she'd heard of this place from a girl in the shelter, someone who had gone there for counseling and ended up on a fast track to an adoption she later regretted. Davis met her eyes briefly before pushing open the door. The bell above it gave a soft chime. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender-scented cleaner, but underneath it was something sharper, metallic, like toner ink and old paper. The waiting area had 2 chairs, a low table stacked with glossy pamphlets about healthy choices and life options, and a desk in the corner where a middle-aged woman in a cardigan looked up from her computer with a polite, thin smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. "We're here to follow up on a public safety inspection," Davis said, flashing his badge with practiced ease. "Need to make sure your counseling facilities are up to code." The woman's smile faltered just a fraction. "Oh, well, we don't do medical work here exactly." "That's fine," Davis said evenly. "We just need to have a look." She hesitated, glancing toward the hallway behind her. "I'll need to call our director." Ace broke the moment. He padded past Davis, nose low, drawing a faint path along the wall until he reached a closed door to the left. His ears flicked, and he gave a short, sharp bark. "Is that where you keep your counseling room?" Davis asked. The woman's fingers tightened on the edge of her desk. "That's staff only." Davis stepped past her and opened the door. The smell hit first: paper, dust, and something stale, like a closet that hadn't been opened in years. The room was small and windowless, lit by a single overhead bulb. No chairs for clients, no desk for a counselor. Inside were manila folders, each stamped with the logo of Everbright Adoption Services. He pulled one at random. The first page was an intake form: mother's name, due date, caseworker signature. Maria's eyes snagged on the handwriting in the caseworker field: C. Jennings. Her knees felt suddenly unsteady. "That's her," she whispered. Davis closed the folder, jaw tightening. "This isn't a counseling center," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "This is a pipeline." He took a slow walk around the room, noting the absence of any medical equipment, any signs of a licensed practice. "Where's your therapy space?" he asked the woman. She flushed. "We offer emotional support, not medical services." "In here?" Davis gestured to the file cabinets. The woman didn't answer. He glanced at Maria. "We'll catalog everything before moving it. For now, I want photos." He pulled out his phone, snapping shots of the cabinets, the box labels, the Everbright logo. Ace had moved to the far corner, nose pressed to the baseboard. He gave another short bark. Davis followed, crouched, and saw a small locked drawer built into the wall. "Interesting," he murmured. By now, another officer had arrived, summoned quietly over Davis's radio. Together, they began securing the room, logging each piece of evidence for the warrant they'd request within the hour. Maria stood still, her eyes on the neat stacks of folders. Each one represented a story, a life rerouted, maybe stolen. She imagined the mothers sitting where she once sat, told they were doing the right thing, and promised things that never happened. "You said she ran it like a business," Davis said quietly, noticing Maria's stare. "Now we're starting to see the books." The woman in the cardigan tried again. You can't just take those. No one's taking anything today, Davis said evenly. But nothing leaves this building until we've finished. He stepped back toward the hallway, motioning for Maria to follow. Outside, the late afternoon light made the faded parking lot seem even more desolate. Davis glanced back at the storefront, then at her. This place is one of 3 addresses that came up when I searched for New Horizons. Different phone numbers, same paperwork. My guess? This is the middle link between the support and the agency. Asphalt and something colder. Anticipation. The small industrial park lay half a mile from the main road, tucked between a half-abandoned trucking depot and a used tire shop. The rental office's fluorescent sign hummed faintly in the afternoon gloom. Rows of corrugated metal doors stretched in straight lines like ribs on a skeleton, each numbered in black paint. Sergeant Davis's unmarked SUV rolled in slow, tires crunching over gravel. Ace sat upright in the back seat, his head tilted just enough to keep both the road and Davis in his sight line. Maria sat beside him, her fingers curled tight around the strap of her worn purse. She hadn't said much on the drive, but her knee bounced in a nervous rhythm that told its own story. "This is it?" she finally asked. "This is where Ace says the scent goes," Davis replied. "Across county lines, not uncommon when someone's trying to spread their footprint." They stopped near Unit 38B, an unassuming door with a rusted padlock. The manager, a wiry man in his 50s with nicotine-stained fingers, met them there. "You got your paperwork?" he asked. Davis handed over the signed warrant, the ink still fresh from the judge's desk that morning. "We've confirmed this unit is rented under a shell name linked to New Horizons Women's Support. You're going to want to stay back." The man shrugged but stepped aside. Ace was already at work. As soon as Davis opened the SUV door, the German Shepherd sprang out, sniffed the ground in a tight circle, then went straight to the base of 38B. His body stiffened, tail out like a rudder. He pawed at the seam of the door, gave a low, sharp bark, then pressed his nose hard against the metal. Maria's stomach nodded. "That's the same bark," she whispered. "The one from the office." Davis nodded once. "Yeah, he's on something." The bolt cutters snapped the old padlock with a clean metallic crunch. Davis tugged the door upward, and the smell hit them first. Not rot, but a strange cocktail of paper dust, stale air, and the faint chemical tang of printer ink. The light inside was dim, a single pull-string bulb swaying slightly from the motion of the door. Rows of cardboard boxes were stacked against the back wall, some labeled in neat black marker, others left blank. Ace stepped in first, methodical. "No files," she said, her voice tightening. "They're adoption preclearances," Davis muttered. "Forged ones." Ace moved to another stack of boxes, pawing at one until Davis slid it open. Inside were dozens of 8x10 photographs, newborns wrapped in hospital blankets, each tagged with a first name written in marker on the back. Some names were crossed out and replaced. Maria felt her throat close as she picked one up, the infant's tiny face half in shadow. These can't be." "They're catalog photos," Davis said grimly. "Inventory for clients." Maria set the picture down as if it might burn her. They treated them like merchandise. Ace gave another bark, sharper this time, drawing Davis to a metal filing drawer shoved against the wall. It wasn't locked. Inside were thick envelopes, each stuffed with cash. Davis flipped one open. Hundreds, maybe thousands. No ledger, no bank deposits, completely off the books. The air in the unit seemed to shrink around them. Maria's heartbeat thudded in her ears, her mind pulling her back to the day she signed her own papers, how fast it all went, how nothing felt real until it was too late. She imagined her daughter's file buried somewhere in these stacks, her picture passed around like an option in a catalog. Davis worked silently, snapping photos with his phone, labeling each box for evidence. "We'll get this to the task force tonight. Cross-reference every name, every form. If your daughter's in here, Maria, we'll find her." She nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on Ace. The dog was sitting now, tail tapping the floor slowly, watching her with that still, anchoring presence she'd come to trust. She knelt, pressing her hand to his fur. "Good boy," she whispered, though her voice cracked. From somewhere outside, a car door slammed. Davis froze, signaling Maria to stay put. He moved to the door, scanning the lot. A white sedan was parked 2 rows over, its engine running. Through the windshield, a figure sat too still, watching. Davis took a slow breath. "We might have been noticed. We're wrapping this now." They moved fast, Davis securing the evidence, the manager locking the door behind them with a police seal taped over the latch. Ace leapt back into the SUV without hesitation, but Maria lingered for a moment, eyes still burned in his mind. Those infant photographs, the stacks of unmarked cash, the neat but fraudulent forms. His desk was a controlled mess, case files stacked on the left, coffee gone cold on the right, and a corkboard behind him littered with photographs, maps, and yellow sticky notes. Maria's shoebox of letters sat open in the center, its scraps of paper now bagged and tagged, but arranged in the same order she had kept them. Dates, names, phone numbers, addresses, each one a thread waiting to be pulled. Ace lay by the door, head resting on his paws but eyes still alert, as though he understood the weight of what they were chasing. Every so often, his tail gave a single slow thump, like a heartbeat. Davis unrolled a county map and pinned it over the corkboard. Then he opened a second map, statewide this time, and tacked it up next to the first. He picked up a black marker and circled the location of the fake pregnancy clinic, then the storage unit. Then 3 more pins went in, addresses from Maria's letters that matched names buried in state business filings, all registered under different entities, but with eerily similar P.O. boxes and contact numbers. The lines he drew between them began to form a web. Next came the lawyers. Davis had pulled Bar Association records and found at least 2 attorneys whose names kept surfacing in adoption cases linked to these addresses. One had been reprimanded a decade ago for procedural irregularities, but no charges stuck. The other specialized in expedited adoptions for out-of-state clients, boasting of placements within weeks. On paper, it all looked legitimate. In context, it smelled rotten. He added their names to the board, connecting them to the pins with red string. From there, the pattern grew. Adoption agency names, some licensed, others operating in a gray zone, appeared in court records tied to those same lawyers. And sprinkled through those filings were mothers whose cases were settled unusually fast, often without independent legal counsel. Maria's file was no longer an isolated story. It was a tile in a mosaic. The deeper Davis dug, the more his jaw tightened. One law firm's mailing address turned out to be nothing more than a rented mailbox in a strip mall. Another counseling center was registered to a man who'd filed bankruptcy twice, but somehow were reports from 2 other counties, complaints from young women about pregnancy support staff, pressuring them to sign papers before they'd even given birth. In both cases, the women had been told their babies were already matched to families out of state. And in both cases, the signatures on the consent forms were notarized by the same person, a woman who, according to her tax records, had never lived in either county. Davis pinned the reports to the board, running a blue string between them and the earlier addresses. The map now looked less like a scatter of unrelated incidents and more like a net cast deliberately wide. Behind him, Maria stepped into the room. She'd been sitting with the victim advocate down the hall, but now she hovered at the threshold, eyes scanning the board. "That's all connected?" she asked quietly. "Every dot on that board touches at least one other," Davis said, his tone measured but grim. "And your case is right in the middle of it." Maria stepped closer, following the red and blue lines with her eyes. "So they've been doing this for years?" "Years," Davis confirmed, "moving mothers between counties, keeping records just clean enough to pass casual inspection. The fake clinics are bait, the lawyers handle the paperwork, and the storage units, that's where they hide what doesn't belong in the public record." Maria's hand went to her mouth. "My daughter. We're going to find her," Davis said, turning toward her. "And when we do, this whole thing is coming down." Ace lifted his head at the shift in Davis's voice, ears pricking forward. Davis glanced at him, then back at Maria. "You've been carrying pieces of this puzzle for years. Now we've got the frame. We just have to fill it in." For a moment the room was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent light. Then Davis picked up his phone. "Time to loop in state investigators. This is bigger than us now." Maria exhaled, a sound caught between relief and fear. She didn't know what the next step would look like, but for the first time, she wasn't standing in the dark alone. Davis pressed a final pin into the map, marking a new address, a property deed that had surfaced in his latest search. It was registered under yet another shell name, but shared a phone number with the fake clinic. The circle tightened, and somewhere in that web, a child was waiting, life onto a different sheet. She'd been pregnant at 19, alone. She'd found a flyer for a pregnancy counseling center that promised free housing and support. But once inside their orbit, the tone shifted. She was isolated from her family. Her phone calls were monitored. She was told she couldn't keep her baby because she wasn't stable enough, and the paperwork was already in motion. When she finished, she asked in a small voice, "Does this mean I'm not crazy? That it really happened the way I remember?" Davis's throat tightened. "It means you're not alone," he said, "and it means we need your statement." By mid-morning, 2 more calls came in. One from a young mother in another county who said she'd been promised temporary foster care for her newborn until she got back on her feet, only to learn weeks later the adoption had been finalized without her consent. The other from a woman now in her 30s who'd carried the weight of her story for over a decade, afraid no one would believe her. By noon, the victim advocate's small office down the hall was full. The air was heavy with the raw, unvarnished weight of truth long suppressed. Maria sat in a corner chair, clutching a styrofoam cup of tea, her eyes moving from one woman to the next as they spoke. She didn't interrupt, but her breathing shifted each time she recognized her own pain mirrored in their words. The common threads were chilling. They'd all been young, some still teenagers. They'd all been approached or referred by counseling centers that appeared caring at first glance. They'd all been given partial truths, pressured into signing paperwork under emotional duress or outright misinformation. And each of them had been made to feel powerless, as if resistance was not an option. One woman, a redhead with shaking hands, told how she'd been promised she could meet the adoptive family before agreeing, but was instead handed a stack of legal documents with a notary waiting. "They said if I didn't sign right then, I'd lose my baby to the state," she whispered. "They didn't even let me hold him one last time." Another described being moved between host homes in different counties so her relatives couldn't find her. "They told me it was for my safety," she said, "but really it was to make sure no one could talk me out of it." Ace lay at Davis's feet through it all, his head on his a theory. It was a chorus. As the hours passed, something shifted in the room. The women began addressing each other, not just him. They offered small words of comfort. "You were only 17. It wasn't your fault. They lied to you the same way they lied to me. You did what you thought you had to do." By late afternoon, the advocate brought in sandwiches and bottled water. No one ate much, but the gesture mattered. It was the first time some of these women had been treated as survivors rather than mistakes. Davis stepped out into the hallway for a moment, leaning against the cool cinder-block wall. He could feel the momentum building, but he also knew what came next. These testimonies had to be documented, cross-referenced, corroborated. Every piece of paper, every statement, had to be watertight if they were going to take this network apart without it slipping through legal loopholes. He pulled out his phone and called the state task force contact he'd been holding in reserve. "We're past coincidence," he said without preamble. "I've got multiple victims, spanning years and counties. The stories match. The names match. We're moving this up the chain." When he returned to the room, Maria caught his eye. There was something in her expression, a mix of exhaustion, vindication, and something close to relief. She didn't need to ask what he'd done. She could read it in his face. "Does this mean?" she began. "It means we've got a case," Davis said, his voice steady but laced with steel. "And it's not just yours anymore." The women left in pairs or small groups, phone numbers exchanged, promises to stay in touch murmured at the door. The last one out paused to thank Davis. "You're the first person who's listened without making me feel like I'm overreacting," she said. When the door closed behind her, the room was quiet again, save for the ticking of the wall clock. Ace rose and stretched, then nudged Davis's leg with his nose, as if to remind him there was still more work to do. Davis turned back to the board. The lines connecting pins had just multiplied tenfold. And with each new thread, the net tightened around the people who thought they'd built something unbreakable. This wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was a reckoning. The office smelled like stale paper, burnt coffee, and the faint tang of dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. The blinds were half closed, muting the sunlight into thin slats of gold across the cluttered floor. Davis stood just inside the doorway, scanning the scene. Mismatched filing cabinets, a desk scarred by years of use, and stacks of manila folders leaning precariously against the walls. Ace padded in beside him, nose already twitching. His movements were deliberate, methodical, every step measured. The German Shepherd had been in dozens of searches before, but there was something about the way his ears flicked forward, his body, lowering into that subtle hunter's stance, that told Davis he was locked in. "Go ahead," Davis murmured. Ace began with the obvious, circling the perimeter, sniffing along the baseboards, pausing at the edges of the rug as if checking for hidden seams. His nails clicked lightly against the wood floor as he moved to the desk. Davis followed at a distance, letting the dog's instincts lead. The desk drawers were already half open from a quick initial sweep by the uniformed officers, but Ace ignored the obvious. Instead, he focused on the right side panel, nose pressed close, tracing the vertical grain of the wood. His breathing changed, shorter, sharper bursts as the scent trail concentrated. Then, without hesitation, Ace sat. It was a crisp, deliberate sit, his signal that something worth finding was right here. Davis crouched beside him. "What do you have, buddy?" He ran his hand along the panel where Ace's nose had lingered. The surface looked solid, but as Davis's fingertips traced the lower edge, he felt it, a slight give, the almost imperceptible vibration of a false panel shifting under pressure. A thin seam revealed itself when he angled his flashlight just right. Davis pressed again, and a small section of the desk popped outward with a soft click. Hidden inside was a shallow compartment no bigger than a paperback book. Nestled in the dust was a single black USB drive. No label, no markings, just the dull gleam of plastic under the beam of his flashlight. Davis let out a low whistle. "Good work, Ace." He reached into his vest pocket for an evidence bag, sliding the drive inside with careful precision. The seal clicked shut. From the doorway, Detective Ramirez stepped in, eyebrows raised. "That wasn't in the initial sweep." "That's because it wasn't meant to be," Davis replied, straightening. He held up the bag. "Whoever owns this desk went to trouble to keep this hidden, which means it's either junk or the kind of thing that blows cases open." Ramirez's gaze flicked to Ace. "Dog found it?" Davis gave a short nod. "Ace doesn't do junk." Document, a title. Preferred buyers. Ramirez swore under her breath. "This isn't just shady paperwork. This is trafficking." Davis felt the weight of it settle over him like cold iron. Each line wasn't just data, it was a child, a family torn apart, a crime hidden in bureaucratic language. He looked down at Ace, who sat quietly at his side, eyes steady on him as if waiting for the next command. "You just handed us the key, partner," Davis said softly. Lowell backed up the files, creating multiple encrypted copies before pulling the drive. "If this holds up in court," he said, "we've got probable cause for a lot more than we started with." Davis's mind was already moving ahead. This list could be cross-referenced with adoption records, court filings, even interstate travel logs. It could connect the counseling centers to specific lawyers, judges, and agencies. It could be the missing bridge between victim testimony and provable conspiracy. But more than that, it was a roadmap to find the children still caught in the system. He turned to Ramirez. "Get this to the task force lead and tell them we're not just looking at fraud anymore. We're looking at an organized ring with active buyers." Ramirez nodded, already dialing. Davis crouched again, letting his hand rest lightly on Ace's neck. The dog leaned into the touch, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. This wasn't the first time Ace had found something no human would have spotted, and it wouldn't be the last. But the precision of this find, the way it had been buried in plain sight, meant the difference between suspicion and proof. As they packed up, Davis glanced once more at the compartment, now empty. Its edges were clean, almost professional. Whoever hid that drive had resources, connections, and the arrogance to believe no one would ever find it. They were wrong. When they stepped out into the late afternoon light, the weight of the evidence bag in his pocket felt heavier than it should. Not because of its size, but because of what it meant. Somewhere, someone would soon feel the walls closing in. And it all started with a dog's nose and the instinct to sit. The small conference room smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish, a scent that tried without much success to mask the anxiety saturating the air. Maria sat at the end of the table, hands folded so tightly in her lap her knuckles had turned pale. Her eyes were fixed on the folder in front of her, though she hadn't opened it since sitting down. Across from her, Ellen Ward, her attorney, was already sorting through a thick stack of legal pads, case law printouts, and photocopied documents. Ellen was in her late 40s with sharp brown eyes and the kind of measured voice that carried authority without ever needing to be raised. "Maria," Ellen began, her tone gentle but deliberate, "I need you to understand what we're stepping into. This isn't going to be—" Maria nodded faintly. "I know." Ellen slid a page across the table, a list of potential witnesses, each name underlined in blue ink. "Your testimony is powerful, but in cases like this, emotion alone won't win. We need to prove 3 things beyond any reasonable doubt: manipulation, coercion, and fraud." She tapped each word with the tip of her pen. "And the other side will fight us on every single one." Maria's throat tightened. "But it's the truth." "I believe you," Ellen said firmly, leaning forward. "Davis believes you. But court isn't about what's true, it's about what you can prove. That means dates, documents, corroboration. We need a timeline that shows exactly how they isolated you, pressured you, and misled you about your rights." From the corner, Davis, still in plain clothes from the day's search, shifted his stance. "The USB Ace found gives us a starting point," he said. "Names, payment records. It's the thread we can pull on." Ellen nodded, flipping to another page in her binder. "That's leverage, but we also have to anticipate how they'll come at you. They'll paint you as unstable, unfit, even ungrateful. They'll suggest you willingly gave up your child because it was easier than raising her." Maria flinched at the word child. Her gaze dropped to the table, and for a long moment she didn't speak. When she finally did, her voice was a whisper. "They never gave me a choice." Ellen's eyes softened, but her tone stayed steady. "Then we prove that. We'll use every piece of evidence, phone records, appointment logs, your statements, and those of other women. And when they try to discredit you, we'll be ready with witnesses who can attest to your character, your circumstances, and the way these people operate." She pulled a fresh sheet from her notepad and began outlining points. Number 1, the ideas that we anticipated in pattern. Pattern of behavior across multiple victims. Number 2, the ideas that we anticipated in pattern. Financial gain linked to each adoption. Number 3, the ideas that we anticipated in pattern. Deceptive practices in counseling sessions. Number 4, the ideas that we anticipated in pattern. Failure to disclose legal rights. Think of this as building a bridge, Ellen said, looking up. On one side is your story. On the other, we'll keep gathering evidence in the meantime. The more we can hand Ellen before trial, the stronger the case gets. And if we can link the people on that USB to other fraudulent adoptions, we'll widen the net. Ellen closed her binder with a decisive thump. Then that's the plan. I'll start filing the preliminary motions and requests for discovery tomorrow. Maria, I'll need you to meet with our investigator to go over every detail. Dates, conversations, even the smallest things you remember. Sometimes it's the little inconsistencies that crack these cases open. Maria nodded slowly. I'll tell you everything. Good, Ellen said, standing. One last thing. These people will watch you. They'll try to intimidate you into backing down. If you notice anyone following you, calling you, showing up uninvited, tell Davis immediately. No exceptions. Maria glanced toward Davis, who gave her a steady, reassuring look. You're not in this alone, he said quietly. That seemed to steady her. She reached for the folder in front of her and finally opened it. Inside were photographs, her daughter's birth certificate, copies of text messages from the counselor who had pressured her, and the intake form she'd been told was just for medical history. In the bottom right corner, in small print, was a clause signing away her parental rights. Her jaw tightened. They're not getting away with this. Ellen slipped her own folder into her briefcase. Then let's get to work. The meeting broke, chairs scraping softly against the tile floor. As Maria stepped out into the hallway, Davis fell into step beside her. Ace waited patiently near the exit, tail giving one slow wag when he saw her. She bent down, brushing her fingers along the dog's fur, and for the first time in weeks, there was a hint of something new in her expression, not just pain, but resolve. Outside, the evening light was fading, painting the courthouse steps in deep amber. The fight ahead loomed large, but for Maria, the first step had already been taken. The door to silence had been closed, and the door to justice, however long the path, was now open. By 8 a.m., the courthouse steps had become a stage. Cables snaked along the railings, microphones bloomed, red camera lights blinked toward the doors. The air smelled of stone dust, paper, coffee, and old polish, like a building that held people's futures. Maria paused at the bottom step gently, a silent blessing, before she followed Ellen inside. The courthouse was cool, its marble floors echoing every step. They checked in at a small anteroom, passing framed photos of long-ago parades and school children. Maria liked knowing other stories had found their endings here, endings that were really thresholds. Inside the courtroom, reporters filled the back rows. The Richardsons sat at the defense table, still as stone, their lawyers whispering in crisp suits. Ellen guided Maria to the front row behind the plaintiff's table. Maria finally pulled out the photo, Elena at 3 months, half laughing, wrapped in a blanket. Its colors had faded, but the tenderness had deepened. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge, known for listening longer than most, took the bench. Motions were confirmed, witnesses sequestered, the air measured. The defense opened first, the silver-haired attorney speaking warmly of hopeful families and good faith, never profit or pressure. He called the Richardsons pillars, letting the words settle like a stone in the air. Ellen's opening was spare. She told of a minor alone in a hospital room, paperwork rushed beyond comprehension, promises of letters that never came. She pointed to the pattern, the same caseworker across cases, counseling centers with no counselors, forged forms found in a storage unit. This case, she said, is about consent, not the kind written in ink under pressure, but the kind born of understanding, time, and the absence of fear. Maria kept her thumb on the photo's worn corner, eyes shifting between Ellen for courage and the grain of the bench when the room felt too heavy. At break, Ellen steered her past the press. Davis flanked the other side, Ace brushing Maria's knee now and then as if to tether her. In a quiet recess, Ellen said, "Tomorrow, first witnesses, one breath at a time." One breath at a time, Maria echoed, tucking the warmed photo back into her pocket. When they returned, the Richardsons sat with practiced composure. Maria wondered what it cost to hold a face that still. The judge set the schedule. Caroline Richardson's eyes flicked briefly toward Maria before moving on. When court adjourned, Ellen told her, "Go home, eat, sleep if you can. Bring the same dress or a different—" "You and Ace became involved in this case." Davis glanced at Maria, then began. "We were assigned to search a storage facility linked to one of the Richardsons' associates. Hundreds of boxes scattered. We started in a damp area smelling of mildew and paper rot. Ace alerted twice, on a locked file cabinet and a sealed banker's box hidden behind furniture. His alerts matched trained scent profiles, in this case, chemical traces found in certain forged document inks. What did you find?" "Inside the cabinet, original birth records with altered names. The banker's box held correspondence between intermediaries, unsigned contracts, and blank adoption forms with forged signatures waiting to be filled. On the monitors, Ellen displayed a birth certificate, Elena Maria Alvarez, overwritten in slightly different ink. A faint original name lay beneath, ghost-like. A murmur swept the gallery. Maria's grip on her own photo tightened. "How significant was Ace's role?" Ellen asked. "Without him, those boxes might have sat for years. A dog's nose doesn't get distracted by dust. Ace found the thread we needed to pull." The defense objected to narrative. Sustained. Ellen refocused. "Your procedure after an alert? Document, secure, photograph in place, start the chain of custody." Photos of stacked forged forms and inflated payment ledgers appeared on the screens. "Were these submitted into evidence?" "Yes. Tagged, sealed, and transferred that day." "In your professional opinion?" "The paper trail exists, and it connects directly to the defendant's network." Across the room, Caroline's jaw tightened. David whispered urgently to counsel. On cross-examination, the defense pressed, "You're proud of your dog?" "Yes." "Proud enough to exaggerate his abilities?" "Ace doesn't need embellishment." "You can't rule out other explanations for those alerts?" "Ace's accuracy rate is over 95%. Here, his alerts led to exactly the documents he's trained to detect." They floated theories of planted evidence and lax security. Davis countered each calmly. Ellen's redirect was brief. "Did Ace have any prior connection to the parties?" "No. He's not interested in reputations. Only the truth their scent leaves behind." A few jurors smiled. When Davis stepped down, Maria thought of Ace outside, maybe lying in the shade, gold in his coat catching the sun. A dog scene. The courtroom felt different that morning, a subtle tightening in the air, a shared attention flowing between the jury box and witness stand. Outside, the sky was a flat steel gray. Inside, every beam of light seemed aimed at one spot, the empty chair where Maria Alvarez was about to sit. Ellen walked beside her, a steadying hand at her elbow. Maria wore the same navy dress she'd worn on the trial's first day. No jewelry, no makeup, but a dusting of powder. In her hands, she carried a single photograph of her daughter Elena, as if it anchored her. When she took the oath, her voice was quiet but certain. She placed the photo on the table beside her, angled toward her. Ellen began gently. "Maria, can you tell the jury about the day you signed the adoption papers?" "It was a Wednesday," Maria said. "Cold outside, but colder in the room they brought me into. No window, just a table and 2 chairs. The man didn't give his name. He had a folder open, pen ready. He told me to sign, for Elena's future. Said my love wasn't enough." Jurors shifted. "What did you feel?" Ellen asked. "I felt small, like every night I stayed up when she was sick, every meal I skipped so she could eat. None of it mattered. They made me believe I was unfit. I asked for more time. They said no. If I didn't sign, she'd go into state care and I'd never see her again." "Did anyone offer you legal counsel? Explain your rights?" "No." "And why did you sign?" "I thought it was the only way to keep her safe." They made it sound like the Richardsons were rescuing her from me, and I believed them. That's what hurts the most. Ellen introduced the adoption consent form into evidence. Maria confirmed her signature. Was it voluntary? It was forced in everything but the grip on my hand. If you could tell those who said your love wasn't enough, I'd say love is the only thing that ever was enough. Enough to keep her alive when she was sick, enough to teach her to laugh when the world was heavy, and enough to bring me here to tell the truth. The defense rose. You signed without a gun to your head? Yes, but fear can feel like a gun. So you chose to sign? I chose what I thought would follow through. The jury sat motionless. Ellen's voice cut through the silence. You've just heard the agency call mothers like Maria easy marks, their children inventory, and consent something to be manipulated. These are not the words of people acting in a child's best interest. The judge called a recess, but when the jury returned, Ellen called her next witness. The plaintiff calls Robert Bobby Kincaid. A murmur swept the gallery. Kincaid, a former agency coordinator, took the stand, thinner than in old photographs, suit hanging loose. His eyes met Maria's briefly before he spoke. Yes, he confirmed. I coordinated intake and placement of expectant mothers and their children from 2015 to 2022. Why did you leave the agency? Ellen asked. Because I couldn't keep doing what they were making me do, targeting vulnerable women, not just helping them consider options, steering them into giving up their babies, whether they wanted to or not. Were you involved in Maria Alvarez's case? Yes. And was her case selected deliberately? She was flagged from the start, fit the profile, no lawyer, limited family, living paycheck to paycheck. We had a high probability placement spreadsheet. Her name went on it within hours of her first call. Ellen's voice sharpened. So before she ever set foot in that office, the decision had been made to secure her child for a specific adoptive family. Yes, the Richardsons had requested her. We were told to make it happen. And did anyone express concern about whether she was making an informed, voluntary decision? Kincaid gave a humorless laugh. If they did, I never heard it. It was a sale, Miss Parker. That's all it ever was. Gasps in the gallery. Why speak now? Because I can't sleep anymore. I see every mother's face I lied to. When I saw Maria's picture in the paper, I realized it wasn't just a bad job. It was wrong. The defense tried to cast him as a disgruntled ex-employee, but Kincaid met each question calmly. Yes, I left angry. Yes, I took copies of records I shouldn't have. But I didn't make those words up, and you know it. By the time he stepped down, the defense's wall had cracked. Maria sat straighter, Helena resting in front of her like a compass. She wore the same simple blue dress from the first day, nothing flashy, nothing to distract. Her attorney, Ellen Parker, rose slowly and walked toward the jury box, as though each step marked another truth she was ready to lay bare. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard a great deal over the past 3 weeks. Dates, documents, expert testimony, secret recordings. But at its core, this case is about something far simpler and far more important. It's about trust. She let the words settle. Maria Alvarez trusted an agency that told her it existed to help. She trusted their advice was honest, their intentions pure. She trusted that when she was scared and alone, someone would guide her, not shove her into a decision she could never undo. That trust was broken, not by accident, not by misunderstanding, but by design. Ellen lifted the preferred placement list. You saw this, a spreadsheet of women, ranked not by their needs, but by their vulnerability. Maria's name was on it within hours of her first call, because she was young, had no lawyer, and lived paycheck to paycheck. That's not helping. That's targeting. She set the papers down with a soft thud. You also heard the tapes, the laughter, the casual talk of easy marks and closing deals. That's not compassion. That's commerce. Her voice softened, but her resolve never wavered. Maria is here for every young mother told her love wasn't enough, for every woman who signed papers she didn't understand because someone in a suit told her it was best. She's here for those who never got the chance to fight back. Ellen stepped closer. Some of you are parents. Think back to when you first held your child. Now imagine someone telling you that you couldn't keep them, not because you didn't want to, not because you didn't love them, but because someone else had decided they were better off without you. She let the quiet stretch before finishing. Do we stand by while the strong prey on the vulnerable, or do we draw a line and say, not here, not anymore? Return a verdict for Maria Alvarez, not just for her, but for every Elena still out there, waiting to be held by the only arms they were meant to know. When Ellen sat, the jury didn't move. Maria felt something, the amount of $2.5 million for emotional distress, loss of parental rights, and punitive damages. At the defense table, the Richardsons sat frozen. Judge Hawthorne noted pending criminal charges against them and former agency staff for fraud, coercion, and conspiracy. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Maria barely heard the rest. She was back in that cold office, pen in hand, the voice telling her love wasn't enough. And now, here, she had heard the world say she was wronged, and that it mattered. The gavel fell. Court is adjourned. Outside the courtroom, Ellen leaned close. You did it, Maria. You told the truth, and they listened. Maria's reply was quiet. We did it. They stepped into the sun. Down the courthouse steps, officers led the Richardsons into custody. No triumph, just a quiet certainty that justice had begun. A few yards away, another young mother who had testified stood with her baby. Their eyes met, and they embraced without words. For the first time, Maria could imagine seeing Elena again, not as a distant ache, but as a real step forward. The visitation room was quiet, insulated from the courthouse chaos. Maria clutched the photo of Elena, edges worn soft from months of handling. The social worker smiled gently. She's inside. We told her she's meeting someone important today. Maria's legs felt heavy. For years she had rehearsed this moment. Now the thought of stepping through that door made her throat ache. What if Elena didn't remember her? The social worker opened the door. A small room, couch, low table, crayons scattered. In the corner, a little girl sat swinging her legs, darker hair now, face longer, but the curve of her cheek was the same. Maria froze. Elena, someone's here to see you, the social worker said. The girl looked up. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between their eyes. Maria knelt, keeping her hands still. Elena slid off her chair and stepped closer, studying Maria's face. She reached up and touched her cheek, warm, impossibly soft. Maria closed her eyes, then whispered, Elena. I'm your mama, she said quietly. She didn't expect recognition, only wanted the truth in the air. Elena furrowed her brow, then rested her other hand on Maria's jaw. Maria's tears came in quiet streams. She brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. I've missed you every single day. I never stopped looking. The girl leaned forward, touching her forehead to Maria's. A fleeting gesture that cracked something open inside her. Can we draw? Elena asked. Of course. They sat on the floor, coloring side by side. Every so often Elena glanced up, as if measuring something she couldn't name. Maria met each look with a smile, offering warmth without pressure. When time was nearly up, the social worker said, We'll have more time soon. This is just the first step. Maria reached for Elena's hand. I'll see you again soon, she promised. The girl nodded, then, almost as an afterthought, wrapped her arms lightly around Maria's neck. It was quick, but real. Maria held her for that heartbeat, inhaling the scent of her hair. When they parted, Elena glanced back once before leaving. Maria stayed kneeling long after the door closed. The room felt different now, not just a place of reunion, but the start of something that could grow, piece by piece, into what they had both been missing. She whispered her daughter's name again, softly, like a vow. Elena. Maria's apartment wasn't much. 2 small rooms, a linoleum-floored kitchen with windows that stuck, but it was hers. The first place without someone else's name on the lease, the first without rules meant to keep her small. Morning light ribboned across the living room, catching lazy dust motes. The scent of fresh paint lingered on the warm cream walls she'd chosen, so Elena would feel light whenever she came home. A thrifted green couch, a worn floral armchair, and a vase of wilting wildflowers made the space smell faintly of summer. By the window sat a chipped white bookcase, its lower shelves already crowded with Elena's picture books and stuffed animals. On top, board games and dollar store puzzles. The kitchen was modest, a small table, a kettle on the stove, and a single drawing on the fridge, 2 stick figures under a crooked rainbow. Every time Maria passed it, she remembered why this mattered. She unpacked a last box, her grandmother's mug, a crocheted blanket, and a framed photo from the day Elena was born. She set it where her daughter would see it someday and know where it began. By the sunlit window, Maria laid a rug and a beanbag chair beside a small wooden chest, Elena's future treasure box. She imagined story times, rainy day cocoa, and Saturday picnics, wanting laughter to echo here. A knock came. It wasn't Elena yet, but Mrs. Callahan, her neighbor, holding a clay-potted plant. "A home needs something living," she said. Maria set it in the brightest sun patch, picturing Elena reading beside it. The apartment might be small, but it was ready for big things: hope, belonging, a future safe from being snatched away. The story hadn't ended in the courtroom. That was only wounds. But she remembered what it was to feel voiceless. Her first talk was in a downtown community center, folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. She told her story plainly: the cold agency room, rushed papers, months of silence, and the fight back. When she finished, no applause, just the quiet courage of women standing to share their own stories. The movement grew. Other mothers began legal challenges. Newspapers called for reform. Detective Davis was tapped to review past cases. "You shook a tree," he told her, "rotten fruits hitting the ground." Maria noticed small changes: respectful nods at the store, help from neighbors, quiet thanks from strangers. On a playground, a woman whispered, "You gave me hope." Maria understood her win had exposed a system that relied on silence. She couldn't fix it all, but she could keep telling the truth. When a reporter asked if she felt like a hero, she laughed. No, just a mother who didn't stop. But across the country, others were deciding not to stop either. At the Oak Ridge Youth Advocacy Conference, Maria stood at a podium beside Davis and Ace, his amber eyes alert. She began, "I'm not here because I wanted to be. I'm here because I had to be." She spoke of being told she wasn't good enough, of losing Elena to lies, of learning that silence is the abuser's ally. "Kids are told their voice doesn't matter. I want you to know, it does." She introduced Davis as the one who believed her, and Ace as proof of loyalty that doesn't fade when life gets hard. "If something feels wrong, even if your voice shakes, speak up," she urged. "Tell someone, and if they don't listen, find someone who will." She spoke of getting Elena back, realizing her fight was for every parent and child dismissed by the system. Don't give them quiet, give them the truth. The silence that followed was charged, then broke into applause. Afterward, a 17-year-old approached. "They took my little sister last year. My mom's still trying to get her back. I didn't think anyone could." "Tell her not to stop," Maria said, "and neither should you." Outside in the cool evening, Davis told her, "You did good." Maria glanced at Ace, calm at her side. We did good. She realized telling her story wasn't reopening wounds. It was building something that could you. Maybe it's the right moment to deepen that connection with your own dog. I keep a little collection of resources I've found helpful over the years. Nothing fancy, just things that have made me understand and care for my dogs better. I'll leave it here for you to explore if you'd like. No rush, no pressure, just from one dog lover to another. Because in the end, it's not about training a perfect dog. It's about building a life together that feels like home for both of you.